How you all doing? Hope everyone's having a great day. We are back for more debate content. Woo! Yay! No, I am excited for it. We are going to get through part 3 of the three-part debate between Matt Dillahunty and Daniel Haqiqatjou. Uh, as per usual, I have my tea. Chamomile tea today. You can see it's kind of yellowish. You can almost see it. Nice calming tea to close out the week, close out this debate series, relax us. It'll be great. This part of the debate, well, I was going to lead off by discussing. Oh, I had this worked out and it decided to. Okay. Um, this part of the debate is going to be kind of it. Well, I was going to say interesting, but of course the previous two were as well. Uh, I was going to start off by talking about what the topic is, but as we've seen with the previous ones, the previous portions of this debate, the topic is kind of nonsense, and seems to have been decided by Daniel ahead of time. Like, it seems as though Matt had no input on what the topic would be, and modern day debate didn't question the proposed topic from Daniel. That's what it seems like. I mean, someone can correct me if they know better about that. So while this topic ostensibly is about which is better for society, secular humanism or Islamic ethics, um, we'll see. I mean, there's a very real chance we talk about something completely different. I expect this is the least likely to be different from our expectation and what the actual topic is. Um, I have a few reasons for that, but I won't go into it. But yeah, I suspect we'll be arguing mostly on that topic. In this case, we don't have a mere negation position like we did previously, right? We don't have a situation where it would make the most sense for Matt to simply say, no, that's not true. Instead, he has his own position to defend, which is secular humanism. And the question we're asking, if the question is in fact was what we expect, of which is better for society, Islam or secular humanism, in terms of like ethics and law or whatever, there are a bunch of problems. The first of which should probably be the most obvious to you. What do we mean by good for society? Um, with Daniel in particular, what he means by good for society is completely divorced from what most people who don't have extremely authoritarian beliefs would consider good for society. A good way of seeing this is that he is opposed to divorce, which from his perspective, or at least what he says, well, that's good because now marriages are stable, yada yada, etc. But from people who are familiar with why divorce is a thing, it's pretty bad for that to be disallowed simply because people will be trapped in bad marriages, trapped with abusive partners, and having no real way to get out. This this is maybe not the best example, but it is a clear one of like what we mean by best is his values, as we've gone over in a previous instance of reviewing a debate of his, skew towards duty and obedience as opposed to freedom and happiness. He doesn't much care about freedom and happiness. Now, he'll pretend that the things he's advocating for, you know, um, women being, having, being married, trapped with their husband and having kids and all, is like makes people happier. It's not true from what I've seen of like trends and whatever, but also he wouldn't care if it was. And it's mostly an appeal to people who think differently to him. You can tell in the way he talks. We'll see very likely when he gives his opening what things he thinks are good, and they tend not to be things like freedom. Um, I mean, this is a guy who has defended child marriage because he wants to have dominion over women and start as young as possible. So what we mean by good for society is going to be a huge problem, an insurmountable one, I expect. And so it is most pertinent that that Matt kind of talk past Daniel here and talk to the audience, to the values of the people he can expect them to have. Most people are not far right authoritarian nut jobs like Daniel is. So you can appeal to things like, hey, wouldn't it kind of suck if your life was miserable, but that was just in service to the whims of this guy in charge? And I say this guy in charge because that's the next thing we need to note, is that what we mean by like Muslim ethics is that's not a singular thing. We often talk, especially in the United States, especially after the wild increase in Islamophobia in this millennium, that about Islam and like Sharia law as like a singular conception that's very strict, so on and so forth. What's easy to forget though is that a lot of religions have very strict rules written in their texts, but don't necessarily adhere to them. What is considered appropriate for a person of a given religion to do and what is ethical or not depends a lot on their denomination, on their personal beliefs. A really good example of this is that Judaism, predating Islam and coming from a time when religions were more interested in defining how a person ought to live, has a massive list of rules. Like, I think it's like over 500 commandments or something like that. We talk about 10, but there are a lot. And most Jews don't adhere to them, even religious ones. This is why you have like Hasidic Jews who do like the extreme of the extreme, try to do it down to the last letter of the law. Hey Kim Gal, glad you're here. Glad you're enjoying yourself. But Orthodox Jews, for example, are way less strict. And what's that about? A lot of it has to do with what gets passed down, what you're taught. A lot of people don't read these texts, and when they do, they don't read them with the eye of this is a literal thing that I ought to do, even if that's what the text is claiming. You see this also with Christians a lot. People call it cafeteria Christianity, of like you go to church on Easter and Christmas, and like, what's that about? How is that the totality of everything? Now, we wouldn't call that religious, but like this is what I mean. There's a huge array of things like this, and that's no less the case for Islam. One of the things that I know for sure is that I've heard some adherents talk about how Sharia is intended to apply only to Muslims, which is already a mitigating thing of like, okay, well, if that's the case, it's a rule set that applies to you only if you opt into it. Okay, like that's a lot less severe than the conception that mostly Islamophobes will try to paint in people's heads about the strictness of the doctrine. That said, I still take issue with that, especially if it's very strict to the exact wording, considering, if there's as written, apostasy is punishable by the death penalty. So if you opt in, you can never opt out, and now you're stuck. Like, is that really much better? Especially given that most people's religion is this religion they were told to be as children by their parents, so they don't even really opt in. They're just so like there are mitigating factors, right? In the United States, most Muslims are normal, secular people. They go about their lives as no differently than a person of another religion. The only difference at the end of the day is like their personal beliefs or what house of worship they'll go to, or like what holidays they celebrate. Like some of the details, maybe some of them will refrain from alcohol or will prefer to like follow the dietary restrictions or whatever, but who's that hurting, right? Like, okay, have fun. Nobody cares. And this is the benefit of secularism, is that secularism allows for all of this, right? It allows for a world wherein Christians who don't really have any dietary restrictions in their creed, I don't think, like, I never understood why Christianity decided that all the rules of Judaism don't apply to them anymore. There's a reason, I guess, but there's no like dietary laws. So okay, eat what you want. But Muslims, there are laws about, okay, you can't eat pork, you can't. I think pork is one of those things. But there's a bunch of stuff. Okay, sure, whatever. That's free for you to do. And for Jews, the same thing. Can't eat shellfish, can't eat pork. Hindus can't eat beef. All right, but wouldn't the world be worse for the people not in those groups if any one of those had their way over the other, with the exception of Christians, right? If Christians don't care at all, then it doesn't hurt anybody. But if under a Hindu theocracy, it would kind of suck for the people who are like, well, I don't believe there's anything wrong with eating beef, but I can't do it. And this is the benefit of secularism. Secularism, like summed up, is like a very easy way of understanding it. The way I look at it is that religion religion in your life is effectively let me restart that, is the promise of society that religion will be important in your life only in those moments where you choose for it to be. It will never be important in your life in moments where you don't choose it. So what does that mean? That means you can go to school and your teacher won't try to convert you or make you pray. You can go to what's another good example? You go to the supermarket and you can buy whatever foods are available without it being exclusively kosher or exclusively halal or whatever else. If you wish to attend church, for example, feel free, enjoy. I hope it brings happiness into your life. And that is like the essence of secularism. Day to day, it's not you don't have to deal with religion, but if you are religious, you are welcome to do so. This is the one of the aspects of secularism is this idea of freedom of religion. And in fact, people who push for religious education in schools are often secularists. The idea is that it should be taught just not as doctrine. You can teach, hey, there are these people, they call themselves Christians. Here are some of the things they believe, and different denominations believe different things. And there are these people, they call themselves Buddhist. Here are some of the things they believe and the different ways they do that. That is a religious education, and you learn more about the world. You have a more thorough understanding of what people are like and what people believe. But at no point is your teacher telling you, and what is true is this religion, and you should believe it or else. Right? That's where it gets kind of bad. And so, obviously, this is the stance I take in this debate, even though we don't really have a strong view of what we mean by about like Islam or Muslim law. On top of all of this, I want to be clear because I know I deviated from the beginning of this point about what we mean by Muslim law is not clear at all. Is that Daniel also is an extremist. What he means by it is not what a lot of other Muslims mean by it. Remember also that there are different sects in Islam, right? I know of at least two, with Sunni and Shia. There might be more, I don't know. And there are reformists within each of those sects who want to change even what those sects believe. There's not like one thing we can look at. But Daniel also doesn't represent a particularly sizable portion of what that would mean. He represents a small group of extremists of the belief. And when I say extremist, I don't mean like how it's often used in the United States as interchangeable with terrorist. I do not mean that. What I mean is that it is fundamentalist in its approach, and even among the like what the media will call extremists, where we're talking about like terrorists or whatever, even they are not fundamentalist all the time necessarily, and if what they choose to believe is different. So like we're more accurately, even though it's not going to be discussed this way in the debate, arguing about which is better for society. Secular humanism very likely expressed accurately to what secular humanists mean by Matt, versus what Daniel wants for society. To call it Islam, I think, is only partially accurate, and it allows him to cloak his views behind the fact that most Muslims are not fundamentalist like him. They're not authoritarian like him. They don't believe the same things, or that society should be organized in the way he's saying. It allows him to hide behind the moderates, or even even moderate sounds patronizing, but it allows him to hide behind the reasonable Muslims, as he is an unreasonable person who, I don't know, uses Islam to justify his authoritarianism. I don't know to what extent Daniel derives his authoritarianism from Islam or the other way around. His Islamic beliefs from his authoritarianism. It could be either way. I don't really know, and I haven't really gotten an indication. But this is likely what's going to come up throughout this debate. And we'll see if the topic ends up being different than this. As a note about fairness in the circumstance, in the arrangement of the debate, because I think there is something to be said about that. We have seen from two of these three debates that this is not level ground. This was not set up as a fair fight. It has been skewed in Daniel's favor repeatedly. My guess is Matt will be speaking first again. In this case, it is more reasonable because he has a position to present in the idea of secular humanism. But this would be the only instance where that was reasonable. And speaking first 3 for 3, I don't know. It seems a little weird. The flip side of that, of course, is that if Daniel speaks first, because Matt actually has something to talk about in his own right, he won't be able to spend his speech taking issue with what Daniel said. He has to present his own case. It doesn't really matter. In this case, we can't fix the problems of fairness that have been up till this point. The only other thing is if the specific phrasing of the topic could be skewed, but I don't even know what phrasing would do that. We've also seen Daniel argue similarly on a similar topic against Aaron Ra, where he spent a huge amount of the time just getting very upset at the concepts of like freedom and democracy and happiness. So be on the lookout for that. I'm excited for it. I think this is going to be the part of the debate, if it is the topic as I think it is, that Matt will do the best at. He's debated this a lot. He's very familiar with it. He might have some specific difficulties in that I don't think he's the best person to debate against someone like Daniel, who is just an unabashed authoritarian who does not care about things like happiness and freedom. He'll pretend to, but he doesn't care. And it's very clear with what he says. It's going to be a values problem, and at a certain level, you can't argue someone out of their values. You can only appeal to the values of others. You can appeal to what would be good for the audience, which is very easy to talk about. You like just ask the audience, like, would you prefer a world where, if you're, well, I guess the people who are, I was going to say, if your partner's abusive, you can't leave them. The problem is most abusive partners tend to be men, and the people who like Daniel are men who want to own women. So it's not that compelling because they're like, yeah, I would love that. I want to be the abuser. But you might instead say, like, would you prefer that, if your beard is scraggly and you want to shave it or whatever, you might get shot or whatever. Like, this is the extreme that Daniel won't say he wants, but has demonstrated he's pretty clearly in favor of prior. So let's just get into it. Let's see how it goes. Let's finally finish this off. I think they're going to get right into it because if I remember right where we left off, they had kind of wound down the previous debate and they were just getting right into the next one. So we'll see if they just start up. I think
this is on the topic, specifically secular humanism versus Islam, which is best for society.
Okay, so it's phrased slightly differently than I thought. It's secular humanism versus Islam, which is better for society. It's almost the same thing. If there are any differences, I don't even notice that. That said, James has said the debate topic for previous portions, and that just wasn't what they were debating on. Most notably in the last portion of the debate where he said the topic was, is Islam true? But actually the topic was, are there any religions more compelling than Islam? Which is so very different, as we saw. So we'll see.
As I mentioned, there will be 10-minute openings. We'll start with Matt, and then we'll
Matt's
have 30
starting
minutes of
again. At this
discussion.
point, switching who starts doesn't much matter. It's just really weird, especially in 3 debates. Why are you having the same person start every time, especially without closings, where you can make up for that differentiation. Shouldn't it be alternating, or better still, shouldn't the affirmative always be speaking first, and then we have a differentiation here where both are presenting an affirmative case? I don't know.
Followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. With that, thank you very much. Matt, the floor is all yours.
Oh, I love
crap.
chamomile. It's so
I thought
good.
you were doing another 5-minute break. I don't have to pee, so it's okay.
Yeah, I also expected a break here. It would make sense, just to take a breather, even if you don't have to use the restroom or whatever, just to mentally reset a bit. I haven't been in a situation where I've had to debate multiple times in a row like this. Even in competitive debate, you have a lot of time between rounds. Even if you go to the maximum time in your round, and the next time the round starts when it's supposed to, you usually have at least 10-15 minutes, just because you have to get there. People they have to tabulate results, process them, put up the postings, figure out what rooms everyone's going to. You have time. It's really weird to have it back to back like this.
Quite that small. So, secular
Just get
humanism
some water,
or Islam, which one's better for the world? Well, as I already kind of worked in some of the stuff, I did a debate on this subject last week, and so I'm going to steal things from that opening, but I also mentioned that secular humanism has as its foundation the betterment of a world for humans.
Oh, I guess I talked about what secularism mean. If people are unfamiliar, humanism is basically the idea of ethics in regards to what is best for humanity. You could basically to say, instead of being white supremacist, where you focus on white people, you're humanist, you're focused on humanity. This could be in the future seen as kind of reactionary if we get to a point where non-human animals are given more moral credence than they are now. I would welcome that greatly. But the basic idea of humanism is, what is best for people in a very, very open-ended way. I think just not to not to prioritize or prefer any particular group of humans, is the way I'd put it. Is that you are prioritizing all humans as opposed to just some. And YouTube's doing the thing again where I paused for 2 seconds, so it wants to load.
And so any idea within
longer
a religion
right.
would at least be worked into it under humanism. Fair warning, I'm going to piss people off.
That's
sorry.
Weird. What is he?
Not sorry. This stuff's important.
I'm very worried about what.
And so I'll start off by talking a little bit about secular humanism.
That's upsetting.
And that it has as its focus the betterment of humanity. Well,
and something else to note is it's very possible. I don't think we'll get it from Daniel because he hasn't proceeded in this way. But it's very possible that Daniel could say something to the effect of, well, because we've proven that God is real and that Islam is true, is the most compelling religion or whatever, which, okay, we're taking a synecdoche for being true, and he hasn't proved that. Therefore, what is best for society? Oh, that was the part of the phrasing that was weird to me. What is best for society would be what is in accordance with God's law, otherwise he'll be mad at us and smite us or whatever. That would be true, but that's not better for society because what it proposes is good, but because we are under threat. So we'll see if we go there. I hope not. That would be a really, really shitty way. That would be kind of the equivalent of the Greek pantheon style thinking. We should do what is pious because the gods like it, and if they like it, they won't murder us for no reason because they're capricious assholes. He could say something like that, and you could argue against it. I just hope we don't go there.
As its focus, adherence to God, which may or may not be in the interest of the betterment of humanity. It depends on which version of Islam and how different people view what Allah wants and what we're expected to do. And we also have this problem that I mentioned the other day, which is the temptation to look at data comparing Islam and secular humanism fails because we don't have a secular humanist state. And
there are huge problems with that approach as well. In addition to there not being any secular humanist countries, there are the countries that are Muslim majority have a lot of problems that have nothing to do with Muslim majority, their Muslim majority uh, demographics. Uh, it's not because they're Muslim that the U.S. keeps invading the Middle East. It's because there's oil. Like that's not related to the organization of their society. And some of those problems are also um, some of the organization of society problems are also have nothing to do with Islam. Royal families and monarchies aren't necessarily a Muslim thing. Lots of societies have had that, but the Saudi royal family makes life really rough for all the people who are not ultra wealthy or royal family or so on and so forth. But that has nothing to do with Islam either. So like the approach of like, let's see who actually is happier, it's not particularly useful. You can see this also because you would likely find that Muslims in the U.S. are likely happier than like Muslims in Saudi Arabia, just because like, well, it's just nicer to live in the U.S. where it's more secular, but they still can follow their Muslim beliefs. There's
May in
nothing to do
fact
with it,
be
yeah.
a bad thing that I might be opposed to have
Also
a
because the U.S.
secular
is richer, is the
humanist
idea.
state. A secular state, yes. But I don't think that it's the purview of the government to be telling people what their religious values should be.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, yes, the United States is an on paper secular state that enforces that is supposed to enforce this being secular, but is constantly being fought. That is constantly being fought against by Christians, oftentimes who believe it's a Christian country, falsely.
And what religion they're going to support. And with humanism, in some models, being a religion, I think there may be a problem. There's certainly values that are consistent with any number of religions that I have no problem at all incorporating into a government.
Yep,
But
like I'm super
theocracy,
on board for all the religions who say, "Hey, don't murder people." That's a thing I like. You know what? Religions, you got that one. We're on the same page. But there are a lot of rules that are kind of nonsense, like the death penalty as a punishment for wearing clothes of mixed fabrics, as in the Old Testament. That's kind of nonsense, I think, actually.
sucks.
That's kind of the problem with religion is that like religions can have good ideas, but their approach is fundamentally flawed, and so you are as likely to get bad ideas. And so you have to vet those ideas, and at that point, what good is the religion as a source of ethical guidelines? You should instead rely on your own. For example, the Old Testament doesn't prohibit slavery, but we've since determined in lab conditions that slavery is bad.
Almost every stinking one of them sucks and have been the absolute bane of the existence of progress in humanity. I won't tell the story in detail, but you guys can go look up why in the West we use Arabic numerals and have algebra and all kinds of things that come from a wonderful Arabic culture, and how, at least in the instance of one Muslim cleric, wiped a good chunk of that out. And
I didn't know about that, but about the wiping out part. But that is something that's like kind of cool to me. Is that the numbers we use are so ubiquitous as characters that we don't even think about the fact that they're Arabic numerals. That's like we know that like we know about Roman numerals. Different societies had different ways of approaching like how to represent numbers. Makes a lot of sense, but the Arabic numerals have for whatever reason, I don't know why, been like made so ubiquitous we don't even think about it. Like those are just what numbers are. You would think it weird if someone didn't understand what you meant when you wrote like the number 3 or something as a numeral. It'd be confusing to you. But for if you went to talk to a Roman in the year 10 AD or whatever, that wouldn't make any sense. But the 3 eyes would, And lots of societies have different ways of doing this. It's just kind of cool that like we have a common tongue when it comes to mathematics. We know what these symbols mean. It's universal. As far as I know, every society on Earth uses them, and so we can. I don't know. It's just kind of neat that we have that commonality and that it's that ubiquitous, so we don't even think about it anymore. We don't even think about the fact that they're Arabic numerals and Arabic notation.
the progress that was being made along there. So the next temptation, if we don't have data to compare two cultures right now, is to look at the lives of secular humanists and compare them. You're going to find some secular humanists who are awful people.
This is
probably paying lip
not a great
service to
argument, but I
secular
guess it's
humanism, but
better for
it's very
the
difficult to get into a no true Scotsman
intuitivist
fallacy.
argument that Daniel
I just
wants to
know a
use.
bunch of atheists who I think are crap. Just have the worst ideas. But, yeah, you're welcome. I forgive you. But in a nutshell, whether a God exists or not, we have problems to solve. And Daniel and I, well, actually, Daniel and I don't have to find a way to work together after this. But in the broader sense of humanity, Daniel and I would have to find a way to work together if we were working towards a similar goal. And if we're trying to do that, I don't get to appeal to a God. He doesn't get to appeal to a God. Neither of us get to appeal to any values that we don't necessarily share. And so that puts the onus on each of us to try
That is kind of, this strikes me as kind of like not knowing who he's talking to. I agree that if we're trying to speak on the axis of shared values, that we don't get that kind of precludes religion because there are so many competing ideas about gods. However, you do not agree on the values that you have aside from that. That is going to be a fundamental problem. I feel like you should know this going in. Like, I think you knew who this guy was. Yeah, you don't have common values to appeal to. This is kind of a, I don't know, I want to call it kind of a liberal belief, but maybe it's not even that. That, like, this confidence, this assurity that people share values at some regard, but ultimately, like, no, a lot of people really don't. A lot of people really do just want to hurt other people as long as they get ahead. This is one of the issues of why Democrats struggle so much arguing with Republicans. They think they're arguing towards the same set of values, but they're not. The Republican Party has often been described as the leopards eating your face party, and there's this confusion of like, oh, but why did they eat my face? And like, that seems weird that people would be confused about that. You have to remember, of course, that these people want to be the leopard. Daniel isn't advocating for this authoritarian. Well, he hasn't started yet, but he doesn't advocate for this authoritarian system of the world so that he can be at the bottom. He argues for it so he can be at the top, and that understanding that and realizing that it's not about what's best for society, it's what's best for him, and what's best for him is a society that works this way and puts him at the top, makes it clear that no, you don't have shared values to appeal to. You're appealing to the shared values of the audience. And the only real way to combat someone like Daniel is to understand that most people want things that are good for them, and most people will not be on top in a society like the one Daniel wants.
Convince the other to share those values. Now, there's a bunch of studies on religiosity and societal health that have been cited in the past, but we simply don't have the data set to really address this. So for me, it starts with what's the focus? In secular humanism, the focus is on autonomy, freedom, consent.
These are things Daniel does not care about.
A number of Muslims, including Daniel,
but he's
don't
talking
seem
to
to
audience,
understand.
so it's fine.
The consent of an individual to any imposition on their body is paramount. You don't get to do something to somebody else without their consent. And it needs to be informed, enthusiastic consent. 4-year-olds can't consent to sex or marriage, whether they've had precocious puberty or not. And it's repugnant to suggest otherwise.
I really like this opening for Matt. It lands really well if you're familiar with Daniel. I don't know to what extent the audience is and how much it might not land as well. But also 4 is, you should say 6, because we're talking about Aisha. The Muhammad, I think his second wife, I don't remember, married a girl named Aisha when she was 6, consummated the union when she was 9, and it has been remarked upon at length by those thereafter who don't go to bat for everything written down in their holy book, that this is very fucked up and should not be defended on any axis. Daniel, however, defends it openly.
When we look at the comparison,
not defends it as like, oh, it's bad, but just it wasn't bad.
Of lives, Muslims in the United States live a completely different life than Muslims in other countries. Not every Muslim-run nation is the same.
This is such good tea.
We look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was signed in 1948. Saudi Arabia abstained, and later on, Iran voted for it. But then, after the revolution, Iran came back and basically said, no, that's not right. And instead, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation supported the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights because it was consistent with Sharia law, or at least some version of that, and squelched their
Oh, very
objections.
good. I like that
the United
he's
Nations.
not spending a ton of time on it, which is better for what he's trying to do. But noting that Sharia law isn't one set of precepts, I think is a good idea. I'm glad he mentioned it, and I'm glad he's not spending a lot of time on it like I did. I got to do that because I don't have 10 minutes. I can talk as long as I want, as I'm sure all of you have been very sad to have realized. But obviously he doesn't have that much time. So, just to note very quickly, this is not one specific set of rules that we can look at and know exactly what we're talking about. People have different conceptions of stuff, of what should be adhered to and what doesn't need to be.
Version. Well, one thing we can say about secular humanism is that there is no sect, denomination, or secular humanism that has ever required someone to believe something that is not empirically verifiable. For the record, I'm talking about facts about reality. Secular humanism doesn't require that you believe X moral claim.
Correct.
By the way, it states what its views are, but that's not a requirement to believe. So
that's not true. So there are moral claims that secular humanism requires you to believe, but it's kind of more accurate to say that if you believe these things, you'll end up being a secular humanist. Things like the well-being of humans is good. That no particular group of humans should be prioritized over any other. Like these are precepts that, like, some people wouldn't be able to be on, or wouldn't be on board for. They just would end up not being secular humanist. It's just one of those, like, it's kind of like a definitional part of the thing. What he's talking about is, like, you don't have to, like, to be a Muslim is not merely to believe in Allah and Muhammad. There are also claims about the world that Islam makes that you kind of have to. Well, I don't know about have to. I don't know how strict the religion is about that. But, like, you are kind of expected to believe, and there are moral positions you are expected to take. Like, for example, the prohibition of alcohol. It's a very simple one, but that is a moral position, whereas the secular humanist doesn't necessarily have anything like that. Not inherent. You might reach after a lot of analysis that, like, maybe heroin should be a thing that we avoid, but that wouldn't be. Yeah, it's not really it's more of like a claim about it's more of an empirical claim than a moral one, even though it's a should statement. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain what I'm talking about here. I hope you understand. But there are in fact some moral claims. It's just very different than what Daniel would be talking about.
Do have beliefs that are not empirical, but there's no requirement that people believe something that's not empirical. No sect or denomination.
And in fact, you're welcome to believe things that are not empirical. That was the other thing I wanted to mention. People sometimes act like secularism means a strict atheism of irreligiosity, that that atheism would be enforced in the sense of, that secularism would mean a society wherein religion is ousted in its entirety. That is not the case at all. You can be religious in a secular society. Secular societies are the most permissive of religiosity, because freedom of religion is kind of a big precept there. That's another moral claim, that freedom of religion is good, that secular humanism would make. It's kind of inherent. But you can be religious in a secular world in a way where you kind of couldn't be irreligious in a theocracy. And that is the big difference.
Humanism has ever ordered the death of another person, ordered or acted to attack or destroy property of any other person or government.
That's not true. Secular humanists definitely have done these things, but they are not things that are in accordance with secular humanism. In as much as they were doing that, they might have been violating their beliefs. Or alternatively, there are ways you can say, like, sometimes killing, for example, Hitler is a humanist act. The humanity improves greatly with Hitler not doing Hitler things. That made the world pretty good, actually, when he was no longer doing Hitler things. Now, obviously, he wasn't killed; he killed himself. But the point stands, right? There are instances where it is a humanist act to kill someone, but what he means is you're not just gonna like go kill a random person because like they're an apostate, like some religious extremists might.
Never overthrown a democracy to impose a secular humanist regime, never been connected with terrorist cells or activities, never advocated for treating people differently over their gender.
By the way, like some people might have been connected with terror cells or whatever, but not like they wouldn't be secular humanist terror cells. They would be in a like I don't know. People believe contradictory things all the time. You can imagine a person who does terrorism, but all like thinks in their heart that they're a secular humanist.
With regard to what rights and freedoms they have, never advocated for treating people with different rights and freedoms based on their sexuality, never denied freedom of speech or expression, never called for the deaths of people for drawing any person or anything, never called for the deaths of people for criticizing secular humanism or any other religious view, never advocated for or inspired suicide bombers or terrorist attacks. Hashtag not all Muslims. I'm not saying all Muslims are terrorists or all terrorists are Muslims or all people with bad ideas or either.
And I don't even think necessarily. I'm not sure. Matt might agree. I don't want to speak for him. I don't know if he would agree. But I don't think any of those things are necessarily inherent to Islam either. I think it's just a matter of like religion seems to go through some phases in their lifetimes, in their lifespans, where at sometimes they're more fundamentalist than others. It depends a lot on both power and socioeconomic political positions and stuff. Part of why there are so many extremists in Muslim majority countries because they keep getting invaded by Western countries. That would make a lot of people extremists. The Islam part is in a way kind of incidental. But Christianity had like the Crusades and other and like what was even colonization was justified on the basis of like, oh, we're spreading Christianity or whatever. Religions often do a lot of really shitty things, but they seem to calm down after a bit. If Judaism is any example, like Buddhism too, like after a while, I don't know, things tend to calm down after reformist movements. They tend not to be as militant, though Christianity, especially evangelicalism, is ramping up in that regard. I don't know. It's just like it's not even like being the more Muslim you are, the more likely you are to do these things necessarily. Just place and time. One of the things I like that Hitchens pointed out, I guess, when he would talk about Islam in particular, because it was, especially when he was doing more public stuff, it was on the brain for everybody. And he was clear that like it's not an Islamophobia thing. It's about time and place. At the moment, there's a lot to be said about the dangers of militant Islam. But he said, I would not have said the same thing in the 1940s, at which point I would have been decrying the dangers of the Catholic Church that had a concordat with the Nazi Party of Germany. Like these things, time and place changes, and what's important changes. As I said, like I think evangelicals in the United States are a much bigger issue than militant Muslims basically anywhere. It's about time and place and what's going on.
But if we're going to put a hashtag not all Muslims, we should also have hashtag virtually no secular humanists. Because these various problems that arise primarily through theocracies and through religion's attempt to control governments and control the world and shoot down anybody who disagrees with them, that's what happens when religions take over a world. Now, the claim is, well, it would just be nice if everybody was Muslim, then there wouldn't be any conflict. And if everybody was Christian, there wouldn't be any conflict. But that's not only unrealistic, it's exactly the same thing that abusers say, I only beat you because I love you. If you just do what I say, you wouldn't make me do this to you.
Ooh, I like that. I hadn't made that connection before, but I do like that a lot. And it speaks on a very emotional level to the audience, so makes it a useful argument in this, let's say, intuitivist, slanted debate. But also it's not true, right? Even if everyone was Muslim, okay, well, what if some are Shia and some are Sunni? There are historically a lot of conflicts between these groups. What if it's a new sect that arises? There was the dominion of the Catholic Church, but then Martin Luther nails his 99 what was it, treatises to the church door and creates Lutheranism, and creates Protestantism as a concept. Now, how many denominations do we have? And that's in a society where, well, there were non-Christians. Christianity was dominant. You know, it doesn't solve all the problems for everyone to be the other one religion. What does solve problems is freedom of religion.
It's the exact same justification. Christian extremists, Christian dominionists, slightly different groups. Christian dominionists want a Christian country, a Christian world. Christian extremists are awful and want worse. Christian extremist organizations are things like KKK, white supremacist, white nationalist organizations.
Or the Republican Party. That one's just for me. I know most
people on behalf of their religious beliefs, not secular humanism, have caused great harm on behalf of their religion. And many will say, oh, well, that's not the true version of our religion.
Doesn't matter.
We're only a few days out from the anniversary of 9/11. The radical Islamists flew planes into buildings. We're only a few years away from the Charlie Hebdo attacks.
So as I understand, so he didn't give the context, any more context for this about like the connection to Islam. I think he's leaving it as assumed, which is fair, but I think, well, maybe fair is not the word I want. Is understandable, but I don't know. One of the things to remember about Osama bin Laden and his organization is that a lot of the issues they took were religious in nature, yes, but they were also about United States occupation in the Middle East. They were extremely upset about. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is as I remember and as I was told, that there was a U.S. military base in some place they thought sacred or whatever else, and so extremism, yada yada, etc. But one thing to note is that like there are geopolitical reasons that motivated this. The danger is that religion, not Islam specifically, but religion broadly, allows people to stoke fervor in order to commit, for example, terrorist acts that they have completely different reasons for engaging in. Oftentimes, the people stoking this, they just want their adherents to do specific things. They don't necessarily care that much about the religious aspect, but it is a useful tool because people will get riled up into religious fervors. So you tell the would-be radicalized person that look, it's an affront to your God and yada yada, etc. So shouldn't you take it out on the United States? I don't think there's anything necessarily that makes sense through specifically Islam, but you can rile people in that way, and that is a danger of religion. But he can leave it the way he did, I guess. That's another way of doing it. I don't know. It feels. I just worry about the Islamophobia that came about.
Or people went in with guns and killed satirists.
I shouldn't say became about,
because
it was
Prophet Muhammad.
Encouraged.
Never in my life.
9/11.
I'm not an artist. I had no inclination to draw Muhammad or anyone else. But as soon as you tell me that I can't, I will, and I did, and I posted it. Not an offensive, nothing. It was just a normal tracing of an individual that was represented as Muhammad, and I drew it. Was that wrong of me? Was it wrong of me?
So by the way, this is something I knew was going to come up, so I wanted to wait until we got there. I want to double check before I say so, but I have been told what the rationale is behind prohibitions of images of Muhammad, and if what I was told was correct, the fervor around it is kind of wild. Why is it forbidden to draw Muhammad? Yes, okay. This is exactly the thing I was told and what I thought. Okay, so as I understand it, I don't know if it came from Muhammad or if it came from otherwise. I was told that Muhammad asked specifically not to be idolized, and so in order to ensure that there was no idolatry, prohibited making likenesses of him. Now maybe it didn't come from Muhammad, maybe it's somewhere else or whatever, but as I understand, that is the rationale behind prohibitions on making a likeness of Muhammad. You can see there's good reason for this when you understand that these people saw what Christianity became. People more frequently worship the idol they make to Jesus, the crucifix and the person on it. This is idol worship to a lot of people. Something that's like kind of wild to me is like how much Christians particularly like American evangelical Christians will pretend like they care about the Ten Commandments, but one of them is a prohibition of idol worship, and they literally pray to a crucifix like an idol. And it gets worse if the guy is on it. It's more of an idol. So like it makes a lot of sense for people who are like, well, I don't like idol worship. Let's make impossible the ability to deify Muhammad. But the problem is he's end up being he's been kind of deified in a way. Like you can hear Daniel and a lot of other Muslims can't say Muhammad without whatever that prayer is after. Or I don't know if it's a prayer or whatever, but like there's always something they have to say in Arabic afterwards. Otherwise, it's like sacrilege or whatever. What the hell is that? If not, you can't take the name of your Lord without doing this thing, I know for Jews, like you're not supposed to take the name of God without without being, in part of a prayer, without being in temple, whatever. Like there are rules and restrictions about this. It's the same kind of thing. That is a deification. And the insistence that no likeness be made, but because it's like blasphemous, is more deification in my mind than letting an artist make a drawing that nobody prays to. It's one thing for an adherent to make a likeness and worship that. It's another thing entirely for someone to draw a picture and no one to worship it. And when you remember that like the idea is to avoid idolatry, it's kind of defeating the purpose. It's wild, absolutely insane to me that this is how people react when the whole purpose is being subverted by them taking issue with it.
Draw an image of someone that doesn't make any sort of quality or quantitative assessment about them at all. I just did something because a religious group said I couldn't, and they killed some other people for doing it.
Oh, and by the way, how do we even know that we're making depictions of Muhammad? Remember, even in his time, it wasn't, or I don't know exactly when the prohibition on making a likeness of him started, but to my knowledge, there are no historical depictions of what Muhammad actually looked like. How do you know I drew him at all? Obviously, it's intended to be like, well, you meant for this to be Muhammad, right? That's the idea. But then you get again like, but it is literally not a depiction of him. I don't know. This is like a well technically thing. I don't know, but it's so wild that like I'm finding even the well technically arguments against it. Yeah, exactly, Cam Gal. Like if I draw a stick figure, is that Muhammad? But what if I write the name Muhammad next to it? Is that Muhammad? What if I meant my buddy Muhammad and not the one from the 5th century? It's all nonsense. The point, if you get back to the point, it comes back into sharp focus where you can say, the point, we're trying to avoid idolatry. This stick figure does not contribute to idolatry in any way whatsoever. Even if it's named, even if I write the name Muhammad next to it, and even if I say it's the guy from the 5th century, it doesn't do that. But I don't know, maybe some people will get mad about it. It's I don't know, it's kind of crazy to me.
Between 1979 and 2019, Islamists, hashtag not all Muslims, have been followed by terrorist watch groups and committed 35,000 attacks with 160,000 deaths. That doesn't exist for secular humanism.
I kind of don't love laying this at the feet of
Not only does it
Islam,
not exist,
but like I kind of do.
I'm not aware of any secular humanist
The
organization.
terrorism thing is just it's kind of rough because it's surrounded by this overwhelming tide of Islamophobia that kind of swept the world after 9/11. So I don't know, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Again, a lot of this is geopolitical. A lot of the specific people carrying out the attacks are true believers, but they were stoked into doing this by people who don't care, and it's just a political thing. There's a lot of stuff. It's yeah.
Been on any terrorist watch list or hate group watch list, and yet that can't be said for Islam.
Yeah, Cam Gal. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Cam Gal says, yeah, that makes more sense. It makes more sense to just stick to the purpose than to strictly implement all those rules. Yeah, it's about the spirit of the of the rule rather than the letter. Um, it's not about it's oftentimes people care less about the specifics than about what they're trying to get across. If I don't know, like I was renting a room from this guy who was like, "Oh, hey, just like don't do your laundry after 9 because the water runs through the pipes all through the house, and even if I'm on the other side of the house, it's going to be really loud, and I usually try to go to sleep like that." Like, okay, so I like don't start any laundry after 9. But then if I started at like 8:45, I've clearly violated the spirit of the rule, if not the letter. And what's more important to him, that I specifically avoid 9 o'clock, or that I don't bother him with the noise? What if he happens to be out of the house at 9 p.m.? Would he care? Probably not, because the point is, is the letter of the law is trying to get to a specific spirit, and that's the more important thing. And it's often missed by a lot of religious believers, and not just Muslims either with this thing. That's why I make it broader. Again, Christians claim to care about the 10 Commandments for some reason, and then pray to a crucifix. They claim to be monotheists, but then have a tripartite God and also saints for some denominations. It's one of those, like, they're missing the spirit of what it is, because, like, well, technically if we call all 3 of these things one thing, and then we call these people saints and not gods, well, it's like, well, but aren't you doing the thing anyway?
Can't be said for Christianity. Plenty of groups attached to both religions are in there. Which one's worse? Flip a coin. Primarily, it depends on which one's in power, or which one is struggling to gain power. None of that stuff exists within secular humanism.
Yeah, because secular humanism would endeavor to end the conflict by refusing to allow anyone to be on top. Nobody can win, so no one will have the power, and nobody needs to struggle to get it. Instead, you would be in a world where you have the freedom to practice your religion as you see fit, as long as it doesn't harm anybody, and nobody will impose on you the requirement to be of any other religion or follow any other religious beliefs.
It doesn't exist primarily because of foundational principles of autonomy, freedom, and consent. And that is, I permit all of you to believe as your conscience dictates and to act in accordance with what your conscience dictates, right up to the point where your rights and freedoms come in conflict with someone else. And that is the point.
Hey, it's the thing I said.
Which a government is justified in stepping in.
By the way, one thing that, like, I know we're kind of losing because I keep stopping and starting, made worse by me doing it again, is the tone that Matt has for this speech. I think it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It comes across as very heartfelt, very important, and like he's talking to you, not down to you, or not from a podium at you. He is, imploring you rather than lecturing you. And I think I mean, as much as as much as debate is a logical exercise in theory, it is in practice also an emotional one. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either. At some level, all logic has to relate to axiomatic values. We talked about this before, right? Primary values and all this, which is at some level an emotional inclination. And so, especially with a topic like this, where he is absolutely not going to be able to appeal to Daniel on the axis of shared values, but he can for the audience, to have this very, very heartfelt tone, very, like, really feel, like I said, it feels like he's imploring you, to see what's good in the world. I think it's I think it works very, very well. I think I don't know how intentional it was, how much it just felt like the right thing to do or whatever, but I think it is a really good thing that he did, that he's coming across in this way.
The founders of the United States created a constitution that was a living document, and they had a notion of separation of religion and
in
government.
fact, I think there was an idea that it'd be rewritten every 20 years, by the way.
They didn't write it in there expressly, but it was included in the letter to Danbury Baptist. The Constitution of the United States was unanimously or the Treaty of Tripoli was unanimously ratified, saying the United States is in no way founded on Christianity, and yet Christianity is the dominant religion here, and is the cornerstone of many ideas of the broken parts of the United States of America.
And something that is like the most secular line of law I've ever seen, maybe there are more, is the establishment clause of the Constitution, that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You are free to practice your religion, again, so long as you don't hurt others, yada, yada, etc. And the government is hereby prohibited from establishing a religion as in law.
And when we throw out consent, when we say, in order for you to be a good person, you are not allowed to leave the house without somebody else with you. You're not allowed to leave the house without wearing some garment covering you. You are not allowed to engage in the sort of love that you would like to engage with another person, even though it doesn't harm anybody else.
On a well technically level, you do have to leave the house by wearing some kind of garment. You can't go out naked, and it's probably better, but that's a thing. Again, this is a well technically thing.
You don't get to consent to whether or not you're going to be married. You are property of a god, no matter which god. You diminish humanity. You sacrifice everything that we value as humans about our liberty and freedom, the right to be here and govern our own lives to the best we can. You sacrifice everything on the altar of an idea that you cannot prove. And that
like you condemn yourself to live as a serf to a figment of someone's imagination. Bad enough, if you were the subject of a king who owned you and could do with your life, and like to whose will you must devote your life, but to a king that doesn't exist, it's worse still. It's a desire for subservience. Now, some people have a desire for subservience, and that's why they find this appealing. Some people, like Daniel, see that, well, if you create a society where most people are subservient, you can just slide yourself in at the top to be the one they're subservient to. You just have to act like you're the figurehead of a god. That's easy enough. That's not a problem.
Effectively, demonstrably results in harm for people.
I want to look up who said the quote. I think he's done now, but anyway. Forget exactly how the quote goes. Is it Rousseau? Yeah, I guess it's Rousseau. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. And this is one of the things where I find it poignant. One of the instances where this becomes really poignant is that, the demand from the theocrat that we chain ourselves to the whim of their imaginary sky daddy. It's disgusting, right? We could be free instead. Now, to people like Daniel, this freedom is not a positive. It's only impact on the world is to allow for people to free themselves from these chains, which is what he wants people to be in. But I don't know. This quote is, I don't know, it's meaningful to me, and it's relevant here. All right.
Thanks for that opening, Matt.
That was a good opening for Matt.
Over to Daniel.
We can
for his
see
10-minute
that he knows what
opening
to do
as
with an
well.
opening when there's
Daniel,
something that actually makes sense for him to talk about. Let's see what Daniel has here. He has another PowerPoint ready to go. Great opening for Matt. Really, really good. I kind of wish he had a closing, that there were closing statements for this debate, because that kind of tone would be much more impactful as a closer. He just happens to not have one. So like it would be really nice for him to be able to close in that way.
Here's a thought experiment.
All right.
Imagine there's a company called Pleasure Inc. and they invent the pleasure machine. You strap a person
Oh, we've
in,
seen this
pull down the
before.
virtual reality helmet, plug in a few diodes into the skull that tap into the pleasure centers of the brain. You pull the switch and then pure unadulterated bliss. The brain implants and the VR are so powerful that any pleasurable experience you want to have, you can have it. You can satisfy basic bodily pleasures, but the tech is so advanced that you can simulate any desire. You want to vacation on the beach with supermodels? No problem. You want to travel the world and sample cuisine from every region? No problem. Every form of pleasure and entertainment is now at your fingertips. The pleasure machine comes on market and is heavily advertised. People start using it for recreation on the weekends, but the machine works too well. People can't get themselves off of it. Eventually, pleasure machine users are
We've
strapped
heard
in
this
for
all before,
10,
so I'll let him
15, even
rant.
20 hours a day. They can't stop using it. The constant supply of dopamine is too much to resist. Before the pleasure machine, people had time for their extended families. People would get together with aunts, uncles, cousins. If you had elderly parents, you would take care of them. If you had grandparents, you could spend time with them. But as more people get hooked on the pleasure machine, there's no time for extended family. And let's be honest, what's more fun, fulfilling any fantasy or sitting and talking with grandma?
Grandma. But maybe that's just me. I think a lot of people like their grandma. Uh, okay, he's going on longer than I thought he would. But like, what he's describing is addiction, right? Addiction is bad, but he's making it. But he's conflating this with pleasure being bad. Why should we endeavor to seek it out? By the way, the reason why people would meet with their families, talk to grandma, whatever else, is because they enjoy it, because they like it, because it's pleasurable in some sense to do that. They get fulfillment out of it. Uh, Now Daniel thinks we do it out of duty, and we hate doing it. But it's dutiful and it's therefore good, and that pleasure is bad, and that in a way you should like forsake pleasure in exchange for duty. That's the implication here. One of the great things about Matt's opening is that he did not appeal to people's pleasure. He appealed to your freedom, your liberty, your your happiness and well-being. That that doesn't mean being addicted to the pleasure machine, right? You could call that heroin if you wanted to, right? Drugs feel very, as I understand. I haven't tried heroin, and I don't intend to, but people probably like how they feel when they're on it. It's probably why they do it. But the problem is that there's a detriment. It's not just that you feel good, but that there are harms that come about to you, the people around you, and that's the problem. It's the addiction, not the pleasure itself. Now, if we can imagine instead that this pleasure machine worked such that in your day-to-day, as you walk around and do whatever it is you want to do, you just feel that same euphoric bliss, why would that be bad? Right? The problem, like, let's actually analyze, what is he actually impacting to? The impact he's trying to make is that there are harms to your life if you get in the pod and just fantasize your life away. I agree. But what if you didn't have what if you could just be happy while doing your normal day stuff? Wouldn't that be okay? So it's not the pleasure part, it's the addiction part.
As the pleasure machine continues to spread, the whole concept of extended family dies off. People only have time for their spouse and their kids, but even this nuclear family gradually becomes too much of a burden. The only thing that people want to do is to plug themselves in. Over time, pleasure machines get a bad reputation for disrupting families and sales start to drop. Pleasure
Now,
Inc.
disrupting families isn't necessarily a bad thing. I know that sounds crazy, but like, if your family is abusive, it's fine for you to be disrupted from them. If your parents beat you and you go live elsewhere, that's good actually. I'm glad you're not getting beaten anymore. The problem is that it is an addictive behavior that he's describing, where people are losing out on connections that they value, and not merely that like the family is being targeted. Like he's using this language because he's trying to avoid the obvious that this is a problem of addiction and not the concept of people making themselves happy. I think it's really good if your family is abusive that you remove yourself from positions where they can abuse you. I think it's better when people aren't abused. But that destroys family, he might say. Okay, good. I don't care. Like, why should someone have to suffer because they were born to a specific family?
It realizes it needs a new strategy. First of all, let's improve the machine so that people don't have to worry about unplugging themselves to eat. Anything the body needs biologically can now be supplied by the machine so that hypothetically you can stay plugged in nonstop. Second, let's get the government to subsidize the machines. We want to make sure that anyone who wants a pleasure machine can afford to get one, even if it takes government assistance. Third, more aggressive marketing techniques are
So
needed.
now let's like he's trying to like put it in the, like all these scary terms or whatever. But like let's engage with the hypothetical in a less hyperbolic way, where we say, okay, now, okay, let's say let's get rid of some of the addictive behavior stuff. Um, oh hey, Fox Roy Gaming, thanks for the follow, much appreciated. Um, but yeah, let's follow through with the hypothetical, right? Now we're getting rid of the addictive side effects, right? You're not going to starve to death. You'll have access. You will somehow subsist without effort. If there are no detriments to the world in that, if everyone's happy, then they're not missing. Maybe they don't necessarily miss that they aren't with you, or maybe the pleasure machine allows you to interact with your loved ones while you're in the machine. Okay, cool. What actually would be the problem? The problem for Daniel is that you're not like being subservient to something. You're not fulfilling duty. But in terms of like what people actually care about living happy lives that are fulfilled and whatnot, if if the world gets no worse for you being happy, why shouldn't you be? And when I say the world gets no worse, I mean including if these pleasure machines were such that people were living in them and not eating and dying, that would be bad. The world got worse. That person died. But if the world doesn't get worse for you being happy, he's trying to act like that would be a bad thing for you to be happy. That's wild. It's absolutely insane. This is what I mean. He does not care about happiness or well-being. He cares about obligation, duty, subservience, so on and so forth.
Needed. People who oppose the pleasure machine say that it destroys marriage, destroys families. Now they're even saying it destroys cultures and religions because maintaining culture or religious traditions requires people to make an effort, to work hard, to make personal sacrifices, not to mention maintain bonds with others. How can you do any of that if you're strapped into a pleasure machine for most of the hours of the day?
So that's the
In the
thing.
beginning,
Like, this is the question that comes up with the hypothetical of, okay, well, people want those connections. Does the do people are people preferring the pleasure to those connections? In which case, why is like clearly they're getting more fulfillment out of that, or are they able to fulfill those connections through the machine? In which case, it's not the connection thing. Again, it's like he's taking issue with addiction and acting like it's anything else.
religious people used the machines, and then sometimes they'd miss prayers, sometimes they'd miss going to church. Then they start
Why
missing
would that be bad? Why would that be bad? Even if you're religious, a lot of religious people don't go to church anyway, or a lot of like believers certainly don't go to church or holidays or whatever. Like, uh, but for him, the reason it's bad is because you're failing in your duty, in your obligations, in the things that you are required to do because you are subservient.
major holidays like fasting and Ramadan and other important cultural communal
Who cares?
rituals.
Lots of
So
people
the
don't fast for
opponents
Ramadan,
of the pleasure machines now claim that the
even
product
Muslims.
not only destroys
Okay.
marriage, family, and culture, but also community and religion. How do we counter that in our marketing? Well, it's hard to deny the accusation, so let's embrace it. Let's tell people that the pleasure machine is actually liberating people from the shackles. Marriage, family, community, and religion are all sources of so much toil and headache. Why bother with that when you can enjoy limitless pleasure? The pleasure machine
And
is
so
the
for
great
him, remember, like for most people, the value of something like marriage is that it makes people happy. People want to get married because they want to spend their lives with their loved one. They like having the big day. They like having the often the legal benefits that come along with it. You get tax cuts in the United States. You get legal benefits like you're allowed to visit your spouse in a hospital where other people might not be able to. Things like that. But also because, living your life with this person would make you happy. Now, you don't need a certificate to do that. There are people who have lived, decades together as in a relationship that are very happy and don't need the certificate. The value is the happiness they get with each other. And if they choose to do that, if they choose to get married and they get the certificate and all that stuff, and the legal benefits and all that, that's the benefit, that they're happy. For Daniel, the benefit is marriage unto itself. Partly, I think, because he wants dominion over women, and he wants women to be, owned, have an owner, that there is a husband to own them. But also just like in itself, if people lived the exact same lives that they do now, and simply chose not to be married, married couples, like, let's take like the hypothetical your grandparents, right? They were together for 50 years or whatever, and it's super sweet, and I'm glad they had such great lives. If they had the same life, they just never got married, they never got the certificate, but they lived together the whole same time, they raised children the same way, they were faithful to one another in the same way. What would be worse about the world? For Daniel, this would be an affront. This would make the world much, much worse if people didn't get married. But that's only because he values the obligation and the subservience that people have to their roles, to their duties, as a good in itself. But those can, in my view, only be good if they serve people. These things are good because they're good for people only. And if we can get that same good without these things, then who cares? As long as we get the good. But for Daniel, that's what I just said is nonsense. It's crazy. And this is why he's like, oh, marriages are torn apart. Who cares? You don't care. Like, I don't care about marriage specifically. What I care about is that it makes people happy.
Liberator. Furthermore, marriage, family, and religion are the source of so much pain and suffering.
Well, they can be, right? So that's the thing, right? If you're in a bad marriage, if you're in a marriage where if someone is, beating their spouse, for example, if you're married to an LAPD officer, like I said, why is it beneficial? What is good about staying in that relationship? Well, for him, it's that you're subservient, you're owned, and it would be worse to break that than for you to be happy being not beaten. But for most people who are will engage with this, well, I guess there are a lot of authoritarians, but like for most people, I think it'd probably be good if you're in a situation where you're being abused that you can get out of that. But Daniel doesn't think so, and he's cloaking it in this like addiction rhetoric because we can understand the addiction is wrong, and for bad things to be happening because of an addiction is clearly bad. And so he can say, well, like, okay, therefore, like, secularism thinks it's okay, or secularists think it's okay to get divorced. They just want to destroy families. That's the same thing. But no, because it's not an addictive behavior. These things are because the reason why divorce should be allowed for is because it makes the world better. Because people are not able to get trapped in relationships where they can be taken advantage of or abused or so on and so forth, because people can make their lives happier. And the harm that he's talking about doesn't exist because there's no addiction. Now, he might claim that like the addiction of being happy is the same thing, but at that point, like, but he can't say that out loud because obviously the room will understand when he says happiness is bad, you shouldn't endeavor for it. You're actually being pretty shitty by thinking you should be happy. But that's what he believes.
Doesn't have conflict with parents, who doesn't have an insensitive spouse, who doesn't feel judged when going to church or the mosque. To make matters worse, these institutions are also rife with abuse. There's domestic abuse, child abuse, abuse in the church and the mosque. Also, these institutions are rife with unjust hierarchies.
And by the way, he's like throwing that out there like it's not true, right? He's acting like this is just the propaganda. But he also has to answer for that, right? If these institutions are rife with abuse, isn't that a problem? He doesn't care. The institution is more important. Your deference to the authority is the most important virtue for Daniel.
And inequality and lack of consent. The pleasure machine, on the other hand, is the great equalizer. When you're strapped in, you can enjoy yourself as much as the elites. Everyone is equal in the pleasure machine.
Or maybe
This
there
is the
shouldn't be
marketing
elites,
we
but
need to
okay,
push
sure,
through
whatever.
TV, movies, music, books, social media. And if
Now
anyone
the
opposes our
conspiracism.
product, we simply accuse them of being backwards, irrational, and filled with hate.
So the purpose of his hypothetical, in case anyone is unclear, is, well, a couple of things. One, we already saw, to act as though, to try to pin the problems of addiction onto irreligiosity, but also because it allows him to cloak what he's actually saying in different terms. To be opposed to the situation that we're talking about, that he's describing, makes a lot of sense because you're opposed to the addiction machine, as I would call it, not the pleasure machine. But he wants to say that that is the endeavor of secular humanists or people who think humans should be happy. So, but in these terms, he's acting as though he's opposed to the thing that's bad, but what he's opposed to is happiness, freedom, and he is willing to get conspiratorial about it. But if he just ran out there and be like, happiness is bad, freedom is bad, here's the conspiracy that that tricked you into thinking it's not bad, we would understand how full of shit he is.
How can you reject liberation and equality? Are you a fan of domestic
His
abuse?
intent is
Are you a
deceive you.
fan of child molestation, of white supremacy, of religious bigotry? What are you, some kind of terrorist? Pleasure Inc. realizes that the older generations are going to be wiser and won't be the biggest advocates of their product because they have more life experience and know the value of life unplugged. So Pleasure Inc. focuses on the younger generations with targeted ads on TikTok and
Here's the
elsewhere.
conspiracism.
Pleasure Inc.
I
also
hope
wants
I've
its message of
made clear
equality
why I
and
don't have to
liberation
answer
to reach
this.
youth in schools. Let's make sure that all schools raise awareness about the benefits of using the pleasure machine and how not using it can cause pain and suffering in life. Adoption of the pleasure machine continues to spread at a rapid pace, and Pleasure Inc. decides to break into new markets internationally. The only problem is many countries are banning the pleasure machine. They don't want their societies being disrupted.
So banning the pleasure machine, that's another thing he gets to sneak in. Sounds like, oh, okay, these countries are opposed to the addiction thing or whatever, but in the metaphor that he's laying out, that is making illegal the ability to be, it's basically making illegal being another religion, right? In his terms, banning the addiction machine is having a Muslim theocracy and making illegal being non-Muslim, not following the laws. He's acting as though you have an additional freedom by living in this authoritarian society, which is, of course, a lie. Oh, YouTube, no. Please, you were doing so well. No. Come on now. All right, should be any second. Usually it doesn't last that long. Thanks for the welcome, by the way, Fox Warrior Gaming. Welcome to the Kick family. I very much appreciate it. Very, very kind of you. Appreciate the follow. In case anyone has forgotten, or if anyone's new here, if we do get partnered on Kick, of course it comes back as I figure out a thing to talk about. If we do get partnered on Kick, and we get to that 75 number there, I have promised to do what Orwell jokingly included in his tea guide, which is to have a cup of tea with either salt or pepper in it instead of sugar. So if we get this number up, tell your friends if you want to see me suffer, and who doesn't? At the end of the day, who doesn't want to see me suffer? Tell your friends. Let's get this number up. Yeah, his argument is twisted because what he's arguing for is obviously unconscionable, but he still wants to argue for it. So if he cloaks it and lies and deceives you into thinking a different set of things is happening than what he's actually doing, he can convince people to agree with his authoritarian, religious theocratic worldview by appealing to the values they have that would otherwise make them reject it.
Religions being wiped out with the introduction of this technology, but due to heavy lobbying, Pleasure Inc. has infiltrated every level of Western government, and they leverage their connections to pass new international.
This is like secularism. There's a conspiracy of infiltration of the government, and it's reached every level, and
law. The new law is that every nation must allow their citizens to buy a pleasure machine.
Every country must allow their citizens to be whatever religion they want or not. That's the thing he just took issue with.
That, but every nation must subsidize the pleasure machine
I mean, he's
to make it
obviously opposed
available
to
to
religious
every
freedom.
citizen. This is a moral imperative. Why? Because the pleasure machine, as we know, is the great liberator and the great equalizer.
His only problem that actually resonates with people who don't believe that duty is a good unto itself. The only problem he could really muster against the pleasure machine is that it has the problems of addiction. That people get addicted and engage in behavior that addicts engage in, like forsaking the people around them or their obligation or themselves and yada yada, and like, you know, losing interest in things that once mattered to them. That person's life gets worse. But of course, religious freedom doesn't make people's lives worse. He's just pretending like it does. It's the, you know, you should be, the idea that you should be happy is what he's talking about here, you know.
If nations don't facilitate access to the pleasure machine, that's a violation of human rights. Every human must.
So now he's again saying it is not a violation of human rights for a country to make illegal being anything other than the national religion. That's what he just said.
Have access to the pleasure machine, and only the most evil totalitarian regimes.
It's completely disconnected from reality, and the reason why it is because he could not. It would be obviously untrue if he described this exact scenario without the pretext of this hypothetical. And it's notice how much of
keep
it's
their
open
people under the
too.
boot by not letting them entertain every single desire. Despite the new international laws, some rogue nations continue to resist. These nations are portrayed as terrorists and human rights violators in the media. The news shows images of little children.
So now in the metaphor, you know, oh, they're portrayed this way, but there are human rights violations that have nothing to do with even his issue with religiosity. Like, there are human rights violations in these countries that have nothing to do with religion. Like, what was it, Assad? Like, constantly bombs his own people. That is not a Muslim thing, you know. That's just an authoritarian thing, and it's correct that these are human rights violations. But again, it's the conspiracism. If you say something bad about an authoritarian, it must be conspiracy. Because, by the way, this guy goes to bat for basically every authoritarian. I mean, he's defended Andrew Tate, whose values are very far from Daniel's, except for the authoritarianism and the domination of women and the interest in domination of women.
Covered in dirt.
He is conflating a lot of things with being irresponsible. He is conflating the interest in human happiness, right? It's the pleasure machine. In religious freedom, in the ability to like get divorced or whatever. Basically everything that's not his specific view of authoritarian Islamic law is the pleasure machine, because people's usual, like, the very common thing people will object to about his view of the world is that people will be way less happy if he gets his way. But he's acting as though, like, well, if people were so addicted to happiness that it made their lives worse, isn't that shitty? And so I just want to do not that. And he's conflating all of those things. But of course, the addiction part isn't part of wanting to not be under the boot of an authoritarian state.
Little girls crying, look at these poor suffering children. What kind of evil monsters would prevent these precious darlings from using the pleasure machine? We need to impose sanctions on these countries.
And because it's the pleasure machine, he can act as though it's frivolous for people to take issue with the things that they actually take issue with. Like, oh, little girls crying, like, how can you not let... What he's talking about is like, yeah, how can you not let people live free from oppression? From, in this case, religious theocratic oppression. That's a pretty reasonable thing to take issue with, actually. And if people were crying about the religious theocratic oppression, I think that would make a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, I get that. Come on, YouTube, please. We were doing so well for so long. Such as it is. It should be back in just a moment. I don't know why it does this, and so inconsistently, too. Yeah, it's really hard for me to listen to this diatribe from him, especially having heard it before, because it is just so fallacious and so full of problems that, like, you see, I have to constantly stop to, like, pick apart what's going on. and it's just highly
If
inflammatory in
half
its
the population
implications.
dies off due to starvation, that's a price we're willing to pay to make sure the other half of the population gets access to the pleasure machine. And if
This
these
is not a thing
terrorists still
secular
refuse,
humanists are on
we'll
board
just have
for.
to use military intervention. We
By the
don't
way, he's
want to use
conflating
bombs
now
and tanks.
like Western imperialism with all the other things he lumps all these things together in part because the untangling the goulash, I know we're mixing metaphors, is basically impossible, but he's also not saying outright what he means. Secular humanists are not in favor of imperialism. They would actually be pretty opposed to it.
But that's the price for spreading freedom. Once we've liberated the nations with the gift of the pleasure machine, we have to make sure terror groups don't revolt. So we can install puppet dictators who brutally
So
stifle
now,
any
like, yeah,
dissent
I
and
also
make
take
sure
issue with
access to
American
pleasure
imperialism.
machines remain
Grats, but
uninterrupted.
that's not pleasure machine
It's also
2.0.
critical that we enforce anti-extremism laws.
The
The
reason why he's
opponents of
spending
the
all this
pleasure
time on
machine
it is because
advocate traditional
again, he gets to like
institutions of marriage,
smuggle in all of
family,
his
gender,
nonsense into
community,
this
religion. We have to
seemingly
silence these
reasonable
agitators
objection.
by labeling them as extremist hate mongers that inspire violence. We can put them on watch lists.
By the
And
way, now complaining about people who are actually extremist, hateful people who inspire violence as being called such, because remember, to him, what they're upset about is reasonable. That's what you should take away here. Now he's saying like, oh, terrorist groups like ISIS are being maligned as terrorist violent groups or whatever. He didn't say ISIS, but obviously that's who he's talking about, or like that kind of group is who he's talking about. And his justification, his defense for them that he just made was basically that, but what they're mad about is reasonable. It's okay because they're right. This is what I mean about him being an authoritarian extremist, a violent person, or like in favor of violence and whatever else, is because he'll mask it a little bit, but it's very clear that he is in favor of religious extremist violence because because he agrees with them in their totality about what the world should be like and what the problems are and how to solve them.
ban them from travel, maybe even indefinitely detain them on spurious charges.
Oh yeah,
Now, we
spurious
don't want to
charges, yeah.
stifle all debate about the pleasure machine, of course. That might make us look too obviously totalitarian. So
Yeah, and so this again, another reason that he does this is he's appealing to anti-totalitarianism as a value that people tend to have. But of course, he's a totalitarian. He wants much, much worse than what he's describing as the domination of the pleasure machine. Like even the mischaracterization of secular humanism that he's describing through this metaphor is way better than the world he actually wants.
allow people to debate the pleasure machine, but in a controlled fashion. We'll set up two sides of the debate. The progressives will argue that people need to use the pleasure machine 24 hours a day. The closed-minded, old-fashioned conservatives will argue, no, 24 hours a day is degeneracy. People should only plug themselves into the pleasure machine for 18 hours a day.
The irony, of course, is that at least in the United States, both political parties are way closer to him than they are to me. So from where I'm standing on the left of like, no, these are two right-wing parties. For him, the mega extremist, they seem like, even the conservative is ceding too much ground by not wanting to like establish a totalitarian dictatorship of Muslim theocracy with Daniel in charge. Like
the good old days. The pleasure machine continues to proliferate until every person is plugged in nonstop. The technology also advances so that a bulky machine is not needed. The tech can actually be implanted into the body. The last remaining resistors say that this is the end of the human race. Human life as it was known for millennia is over, and even the human body has been transformed into a transhumanist abomination. All humans are now subjugated by this all-controlling totalitarian system. But Pleasure Inc. scoffs at all this and says, how could we be totalitarian when we give people everything they desire? Sure, people can't change the overall system and we impose it on them by brute force, but that's okay because it's all for the greater good.
It's also it's even in his terms, it's not an imposition. It's that people should have access to this pleasure machine. They should have access to happiness. In a way, actually, it makes his position seem even more insidious, because you realize that even according to him, it's the problem other countries were having was that they weren't allowing people access to the pleasure machine. So people shouldn't even have the ability to make themselves happy. That's what he's upset about. And he's calling it totalitarian for people to have access to happiness. Even in the world he is laying out, people could just not. People could just choose not to get into the pleasure machine. Just be like, oh, okay, you do you, but I'm not going to do it. That would be kind of humanist, by the way, in the sense of like, a person could be religious, or I guess secularist. A person could be religious, not get in the machine, and that would be okay. Even in his description of things, people aren't forced into the machine, but he's calling that totalitarian.
So that's the metaphor.
The
pleasure
totalitarian
machine is the secular
according to
humanist
him, is
ideal.
being allowed
Human
to
life should be
have
structured
any
around the
control over your
individual
life
pursuit of
or
happiness and pleasure. This requires liberating people from all social norms and obligations, because our obligations to others hinder our individual
That
happiness.
obligation, remember?
Technology can be used to free us from these obligations and
Why are those
facilitate our
obligations good?
individual.
By the way, the people feel often that they have obligations to family, but why? Because, well, one, there's a good that comes about by helping your family, right? If your sibling is struggling and you loan them some money or whatever, their life gets better. Isn't that good? It also makes people happy to have those kinds of connections, especially lifelong connections like you can have with family. The reason why they're good is because of the happiness. But no, for him, he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit. If your family could be the worst people ever, but you have an obligation to them. For him, like, the question that you might want to ask if this were on the subject of like how much deference should one have to your family is if you found yourself born to literal Nazis. I don't mean like neo-Nazis. I mean like literally the child of Goebbels or whatever. Would it be better to depart from them, to fight against everything they hold dear, or to maintain your obligation to them despite the fact that they're genocidal lunatics? I would say the former is preferable.
Happiness, the pleasure machine represents this taken to its logical conclusion. Every time humanists tell people to throw off their obligations to others in favor of pursuing individual happiness, they're essentially pushing the pleasure machine. What is also a part of the metaphor is that the pleasure machine is not pushed onto people by telling them they must obey. Rather, it's pushed by saying, enjoy yourself, be free. The people who want to control you, they are the ones who say, obey. But we say, enjoy yourself.
So now he's accusing the other side of doing the thing he's literally doing, which is flipping the script about who is a totalitarian and who isn't. But he can't even do it particularly convincingly, because he's even saying like, yeah, the pleasure machine advocates are like, no, you're just free, whereas the people who want you to be disallowed access to this are the totalitarians. Now, obviously, I would prefer that people not have, well, maybe not have access, but like, I agree that addiction is wrong, but that's not, obviously, he is repeat mode. You think so?
Aren't we so much better? This is exactly what secular humanists say to Islam. But the reality is secular humanism is a totalitarian system of liberation and equality that has been imposed on the entire world.
Yeah,
it's a system that gradually, and I emphasize this, gradually destroys basic human institutions like marriage, family, community, religion, and ultimately...
By the way, basic human institutions is kind of hilarious. Marriage was not a thing for a long time. Marriage in the scope of human history is fairly new, actually.
The human race itself, and whoever resists it is considered a fundamental extremist who must be brought to heel.
So no,
Islam
it's not whoever resists
also
it, it's people like you who
about
are
individual human happiness. But Islam sets limits because there are other institutions and norms worth preserving. Institutions
why?
Of marriage,
why are they worth
family,
preserving?
community, religion.
This is the question he has done all of this to avoid answering. Why are these things worth preserving? For him, it's because of obligation, because you are obligated to it, and therefore you must. You are not but a slave, and you must do as you are commanded. That is your role. To do anything else is outside of your place. But he can't say that, so instead he just says, oh, I forget exactly how he put it, but like, that these things are oh, shit, it's
Worth
kind of important.
preserving.
Worth preserving, yeah. Like, he just says they're worth preserving, but for no reason. There's no reason why they're worth preserving other than that they exist. There are things that exist that are not worth preserving. Slavery, for example, was one of those things. Or I guess is. Slavery isn't really gone, unfortunately. But slavery, that's a thing not worth preserving. I feel like we should stop preserving it. Just because it exists doesn't mean it's okay. It's good. And with all of these things, the problem he's having is that people have reasons to take issue with some of these institutions, or at the very least, the way he would have these institutions be. But he doesn't like that because people, they're getting uppity. You know, they're out of their place. They're trying to break their shackles, and that is not allowed.
Institutions of marriage, family, community, religion, and the human race itself.
The human race itself, yeah, definitely secular humanists against the concept of humanity existing. Yeah, you got it. Buddy.
It is far better than secular humanism.
Okay, so I'd like to note what happened in his speech from like now that we've gotten to the end of it, because notice he stopped talking. Did he say literally anything about what would be good for society in Islam? No? Literally nothing, right? If he even alluded to it, it was at the end, and the implication would have been that Islam would protect these institutions. Why are they good though? He didn't answer that. Why are they worth preserving? There's no reason, because he knows that he can't appeal to the values that people actually have, like it makes people happier. He just got upset about people being happy for 10 minutes. Instead, he gave a hypothetical about the pleasure machine, didn't make clear what it was relevant to because he never made clear what is the, you know, make concrete the connection to the debate. The pleasure machine is what? Is it secular humanism? Is it freedom? Is it happiness? Is it religious freedom? Never makes it clear. So what did he say that's actually relevant to the debate? Nothing except by implication. But he needs to do that because he cannot be honest about his beliefs without being correctly identified as the monster that he is. He's inhuman. I'll be honest. Like, this guy is actually, like, inhuman. He's a demon. And he knows that, so he can't tell you what he actually thinks. What he actually thinks is that secular humanism engages in this, encourages people to make their lives happy. That is inherently bad, because when people are trying to become happy, they don't follow the rules and obligations that he wants to set forth for them. They try to be free as opposed to subservient to his view of how the world should be. The people who, as a note, violent terrorist extremists are justified in their belief. Totalitarian governments that prohibit humanism, secularism, human happiness are good for that reason. And it is totalitarian for someone to say, hey, people shouldn't have to live under your boot. That was his argument. Implying that you will be more responsible with Islam. Yes. So, like, the only impact he can really derive that doesn't fully out him as a complete monster is the idea that there are obligations we have while trying actively to avoid why those obligations exist or why they're worthwhile. There are obligations you can have that are bad. You know, again, like if someone is a slave, they have obligations to their master. Those are bad. It's bad that they have those obligations, and they should be free of them. They should not be enslaved. But to him, the obligation is a good unto itself because he's an authoritarian, but he's not going to explain why obligations are good. Instead, simply say, well, there are these institutions, and, like, don't you on a gut level think that they're good? I'm not going to say why they're good. I'm just going to imply it because I can't be honest about my positions here. I am a little worried that Matt is not the right guy to handle this kind of approach. I think he's too used to arguing with people who, comparative to Daniel, argue in good faith, and that is really wild because I've seen the people he debates against. They do not argue in good faith, but they are at least honest in what they say when they say it, as opposed to Daniel, who is also trying to hide what he really believes.
you very much for that opening, Daniel. Folks, if you're watching, I want to remind you, DebateCon 4 is coming
But
up
yeah, he didn't
this
say
November
literally
4th
anything
in
on the debate
Dallas,
topic,
Texas. You don't
except
want
by
to miss it.
implication.
Check out the
He's
description.
letting you, the audience, derive what he means by the pleasure machine, nebulously, whatever Matt stands for. That's probably the closest to what the implication was. Roped into that things he definitely doesn't stand for, like American imperialism. Uh, and basically lied about the dynamic for 10 minutes. Lied about who's the totalitarian, who's the authoritarian. It covered up, but just didn't actually say anything about Islam or secular humanism. Did he even say the words secular humanism at any point? Oh, I think he said it once.
Description box for the link for that conference. And if
This
you're
is
from far
2 out of
away
3 where he's
across the
been
globe,
completely off
hit
topic.
subscribe, as we'll be streaming all of those debates live for the
Well, this
public.
one's off
With that,
topic,
we're going to jump
on
into
topic
open
by
dialogue.
implication, at
Gentlemen,
least.
the floor is all yours.
All right.
I didn't know secular humanism was a totalitarian. What?
The mic. Yep, something wrong with the mic.
Oh, I thought somebody said something. Totalitarian regime. I need to call my, well, I don't actually have stocks, but if I had somebody who's managing my stocks, I'd want to call and put in an order on straw and oil because we are currently out of straw after that straw man and oil after it got pushed down that slippery slope. In what has to be the biggest grandstanding,
Yeah.
whining misrepresentation
true.
of secular humanism
Let 'em
and
have it,
cancel
Matt.
culture
Let's
that
go.
I've ever heard. Cancel culture, by the way, is the real whine here, but it's not about canceling, it's about
Oh,
accountability.
I forgot. I forgot that, yeah, he takes issue with cancel culture, quote unquote, because people are. First of all, he doesn't get canceled. People take issue with the fact that he's a inhumane monster and call him out for it, and he's like, it's cancel culture. I'm being persecuted because he knows that if he comes off as the victim, then people will feel sympathy for him a little bit. The authoritarians do this all the time. Bigots do this all the time. But this is also why he plays up the Islamophobia thing when it comes up. But dude, you literally went to bat for extremist terrorists, not 5 minutes ago. You did that. So, it's not an Islamophobia thing. It's you are in favor of religious violence thing.
And it seems strange to call secular humanism as, oh, it's just about pleasure and everything else. And if you dare to say something like it's okay to forcibly marry a 4-year-old, they're just going to call you awful. They're going to say, are you a child predator? It's okay. It's okay. We don't need to cancel anything. We don't need to ban the pleasure machine. The pleasure machine will either kill us off, or climate change will, or work out ourselves. So since we're supposed to be having a discussion and I have to ask a question to start with, I'll start with my first question. One of the first questions I thought of, which I thought of
actually
before.
I'm kind of thinking, what would be a good approach to what Daniel just did? Because obviously you can't really. He didn't make arguments, and he spoke for 10 minutes. If you wanted to address. He spoke for 10 minutes on just the pleasure machine. If you wanted to address it, it would take a long time. So I wonder if maybe a good approach would be to just ask him, what is the pleasure machine? Well, the pleasure machine's not real, right? So it's not a problem. And then make him concretize it. Say, okay, what is it in the real world that you think is the pleasure machine? Because then he actually has to commit to a claim. If he says it's secular humanism, if he says liberalism, if he says it's whatever, you can make very clear how that's just not true whatsoever. Or his claims about it are completely erroneous. The easiest one is if he says secular humanism. Secular humanists do not like American imperialism, and he was describing that as an aspect of the pleasure machine. No, you're just wrong. You're lying. Make him concretize of oh, is it religious freedom? So when countries are impugned for not allowing religious freedom, you think that's totalitarianism and not their religious dominionism. Make it obvious to the audience what it is that he's actually saying. Maybe that would be a workable method. Maybe ask him well, you didn't say it. Maybe don't accept the implication.
we ever
Just
got
be like,
here.
hey, you didn't say anything about the topic. What's up with that?
Is Islam encouraging terrorism, or is it just really inept at stopping it from its adherents?
Not a great
Okay.
question because it plays into the Islamophobia and it's a false dichotomy. But that said, I mean, if you wanted to talk about this, the guy went to bat for terrorism. He likes it. Don't ask about Islam. Ask about him.
Okay, let me respond to certain things. Like if we want to talk about terrorism, okay, the values of secular humanism, like the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of individual happiness, that was the basis.
The values, such as literally one thing. He made it seem like two by saying, by like putting the like or there, or like the comma or whatever. But he said the same thing. It's happiness. But that's not the only value. It's just the only value he cares about because it's the one he's found a way of maligning indirectly.
Of the French Revolution. That was the basis of the American Revolution. That was the basis
No,
of
it
the
wasn't.
Communist Revolution, the Decembrist
No,
Revolution. All of
it
these
wasn't.
revolutions
That's a lie.
that were
Also, some of these
explicitly
revolutions
on the
were good
basis
things.
of reason and improving human happiness on the basis of reason and overthrowing religion. That is the ideological basis of
Oh,
all
wait,
of
hold
those.
on. Overthrowing religion? No, none of those revolutions had anything to do with that. Not a single one. Wait, what the hell?
Those movements that ended up killing hundreds of thousands of people. Obviously, you are not going to consider them to
The
be terrorists.
whataboutism. There's people who I can conflate as being ideologically sympathetic to you did more harms as nothing. First of all, it's not true. Second of all, it doesn't address the charge, right? Okay, let's say we're both bad, but you're saying you're bad, right?
That's very convenient for you. But the people who were being killed by these groups did consider them to be terrorists. The
No, they
regimes that
didn't.
were displaced by these groups did consider them to be terrorists. But the winners are able to write history. You keep bringing up like this point about 4-year-olds. This is like a straw man that was put forth in a previous debate. Nowhere did I say that a 4-year-old should be, in a sexual relationship. It was a hypothetical.
Notice the hair he just split. The 4-year-old shouldn't be in a sexual relationship. He is okay with them being married, though. That's not actually different. Or that's not actually... I guess it's a little bit better. But it's still terrible. He is sometimes justified the marriage to Aisha by saying, well, they didn't consummate the marriage until she was 9. As if that's okay in any way. But he splits the hair. He says, "Oh no, they shouldn't be in a sexual relationship, but they can be married. They just have to wait 2 years before they can have sex." That's not good either, bro. He's just dodging the charge. This is what I mean. Like, he has to be aware of how much of a liar he is because he could not do this consistently and this effectively otherwise. Like, why is he never? Why does he pretend like what he's saying is better than a 4-year-old should be, than him being in favor of 4-year-olds being sexual relationships? You think they should be married. They should be allowed to be married, shackled for life, and if the marriage is consummated when they're 9, you think that's okay. It's not.
That was presented to me, and I answered that on the basis of the hypothetical that was presented. Nowhere did I say that, oh yeah, 4-year-olds go through puberty and therefore they should be sexually active.
So notice even there, going through puberty means that that they should be sexually active. This is the justification he made for Muhammad consummating the marriage with Aisha at age 9. The implication from that debate that they're referencing probably was, well, if a 4-year-old goes through precocious puberty, isn't that okay for you then? Because the difference between a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old in terms of their ability to consent is basically nothing. Yeah, a 9-year-old is more cognizant than a 4-year-old, but neither are able to consent, and so it's as much of a problem as what you are actually okay with.
You're saying a hypothetical 4-year-old who went through precocious puberty, it would be okay to have sex with them because that's what you said in the debate.
So we can
did he?
go through what I said in that debate from the beginning.
Answer the fucking
I thought
question.
you want to stick on the topic of the debate.
Well, I'm just saying
I want you
you're
to
now
answer the
denying
question.
that you said what we all heard you say, which
No, I
got
said-
popularized over the internet because Mike specifically asked, if a 4-year-old goes through
Notice how he's
precocious
running
puberty,
from what he believes.
under your version of what
'Cause he
Allah
knows how
permits,
it
is it
looks.
permissible to marry and have sex with her? And your answer was yes.
No, the point that I put to that person in that debate was that if we accept that someone is going through puberty, that means that the person is going to desire sexual relations.
Not
They're going to
necessarily,
desire to
but
be
also it doesn't
sexually
matter.
active. And that is a biological fact. It just doesn't happen at 4 years old. It
Why does
happens
it
at
matter?
9, 10, 11, 12 years old.
So again, this is an argument by implication. Why would it matter if someone who undergoes precocious puberty has a desire to engage in sexual relationship? Why does it matter? They're talking about whether it's okay to engage in a relationship, and then he's talking about the desire. The implication being is the implication is that if someone desires sexual relationship, it's okay to engage in one, but that's not the case. Again, argument by implication and then running from what he believes. Yeah, like you said, Kebia, now he's cornered. Now this is off topic, but not really. Because ultimately, as I mentioned at the beginning, from the outset, that we're not actually debating Muslim ethics or Islamic ethics. We're debating Daniel's ethics. And he's a monster. Demonstrating that, making clear what this guy is okay with, is very much on topic.
And that's why when we
And
look
by the way, even if you think he's arguing for Muslim ethics and not just his own personal branch, what does it say that the advocate for that position is comfortable with pedophilia?
look at
Yeah, it's
American
disgusting.
culture and Western culture,
This is what I mean. I wonder if maybe because I've talked about this guy as being absolutely disgusting over and over, like every time we've reviewed a debate of his, and I wonder if that hasn't really gotten across until this moment of like how bad he is and why I feel justified in extrapolating his beliefs in the way I do. I've heard him speak more than the debates we've watched on this channel, and yes, this guy is an absolute demon. He justifies anything he thinks like I don't know, like this is one of those things, like I don't know if he justifies Muhammad's marriage to Aisha because he's Muslim and therefore and an extremist and therefore has to rationalize it, or because he has that inclination and he likes that Islam deifies a guy who was on board for it. But either way, he goes to bat for absolutely disgusting ideas of what is okay, including but not limited to marrying children, consummating the moment they hit puberty, the complete domination of society by an authoritarian theocrat. The guy is a monster, and I didn't say that for nothing up until this point.
the children at that age are highly sexually active.
Oh, and by the way, this goes back to the discussion about the responsible platforming by modern day debate. Now, like, if this was like a revelation to you about who this guy is and like how bad he is, I want you to like think about it going back, like, oh yeah, modern day debate put this guy on stage repeatedly in a circumstance where he can lie about his views to convince people to his repugnant belief system that justifies the unconscionable. What's more, in this instance, particularly more than any of the other ones, they allowed him to dictate the terms of the debate. In what world is that reasonable for modern day debate to have done? I'm okay with a lot of the platforming they do, even in cases where other people are not, because they engage in other they make sure that they're not just platforming a whack job a lot of the time. I've seen them. There's a debate between Vosh and Destiny versus Eric Stryker and James Alsup. The latter two are literal neo-Nazis. But I don't take issue with them being platformed because the people they brought in to debate them are very, very good at tearing apart Nazis in a debate. And they were mega embarrassed afterwards. The Nazis in that debate were absolutely demolished. And why? Because the platforming wasn't in a position. It wasn't where they got to dictate the terms and they got to just talk at length without getting challenged or whatever else. No, they brought in probably the two best people on the internet for debating Nazis to absolutely pick them apart. But they don't do that with Daniel. They get people who, like Matt Dillahunty, are used to having debates with people who are at the very least slightly honest about what they believe when they argue, who at the very least don't openly argue that pedophilia is okay, who try to hold to some level of dignity and respect, and who will accept terms of civility about not interrupting, which just allows him to go on at length and lie even longer. This is what irresponsible platforming looks like, and I hope that's clear now.
That's the reality in the world today. So you, or I won't say you because I don't know what your views are, but the person that I was debating has no problem in there being, this laissez-faire attitude towards children 9, 10, 11, or even younger, being active with sexual dating, going to prom, going to these kinds of...
He's conflating marrying a 4-year-old with going to prom. By the way, there's a really big difference between two 16-year-olds having sex with each other and a 30-year-old marrying a child. By the way, when Muhammad married Aisha, he was, 52? Something like that? He was in his 40s or 50s. That is very different than people of the same age who happen to be under 18 having sexual relationships. The problem he has, by the way, is that it's a sexual relationship outside of marriage. He does not give a single shit about how old the people are, about their ability to consent. The only thing is it's outside of marriage. So, yes, a 50-year-old can marry a child, and Daniel's okay with it. But two 16-year-olds shouldn't go to prom because they might have sex.
Of dances, boyfriend, girlfriend, fornicating.
Dances.
That is
He's
all
taking
allowed.
issue with
So you don't have a
dancing.
problem, or people who are scoffing and laughing, they don't have a problem with 9-year-olds
laughing at you
having
because
sex. They just
you're
have
absurd.
a problem with the idea of a 9-year-old getting married. That was
He
the
acts
point
as
of
though it's
that debate,
frivolous.
and we don't have to rehash it.
Well, I think, Mike Jones, if you're watching, I think Daniel just suggested that you're okay with 9-year-olds engaging in sexual activity. And I want to verify that, because if that is
Are you?
true,
No way that's
if that's
true.
true, Mike, you're as repugnant as Daniel is. But I don't think that's true.
So do you
Maybe
think we
still
should have
not
a
as
ban on
repugnant.
9-year-olds dating?
What
Dating?
counts as dating?
What if a 9-year-old wants to have sex with another 9-year-old boy? Do we have laws? Should we have laws that prevent that?
This
Do you
isn't
understand?
about.
He
Should
doesn't,
we?
again, because he doesn't understand that he doesn't care about the difference between someone being groomed as a child and two children engaging in mutual behavior. By the way, 9-year-olds tend not to have sex. I don't know. I don't remember offhand the average age that people lose their virginity, but it's older than that by a decent amount. But also, if two 9-year-olds are fooling around or whatever, they're 9. It's very different. Neither of them has a cognitive advantage. I think it's probably better that they don't, but it shouldn't be illegal. Whereas the ability for someone who's much older, who's above the age of consent, to groom a child, like what he's suggesting, to marry them, make them subservient, and impregnate them or whatever else, it's disgusting.
Oh, now it's not about 9-year-olds.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sorry.
he's-
Do I get to answer your question?
Yes, please
Are
answer.
you going to
Are you in
ask
favor?
it and answer
Are
it?
you in favor
now
of
he's okay
laws that
with,
would ban a 9-year-old
interrupting?
girl from sleeping with a 9-year-old boy? Yes or no?
We don't have
Yes
law.
or no?
Oh, now you care about it?
Okay,
Yes or
one
no?
more time, since you're going to do the yes or no thing. One more time with the question. Am I in favor of laws that would ban that? No.
Okay. So you
Matt,
don't have a problem.
you got to continue after that. You can't let him dominate the conversation like that. This is what I mean about Matt not being the right guy for this. He is the right guy for a lot of debates, but you have to understand what's going on. He's trying to railroad the conversation and dictate the pace. Don't let him interrupt. Tell him to shut the fuck up. And I'm in those exact words. I don't mean like it's okay. You can be uncivil. What this guy is arguing for is pedophilia.
9-year-olds having sex.
That's a lie, and you are the most dishonest person I've ever engaged with. You just
True.
forced me to answer yes or no to a question about whether or not I would advocate for a law. And then when I said that I would not advocate for the law, you suggested I don't have a problem with it. I have massive problems with it. You're the one that doesn't have a problem with it,
Apparently
which is
not
why
enough
this
to
is the
suggest
only
legislation.
debate we are ever going to do. And I don't care if you lie about my views. Don't fuck kids.
So
I like that, actually. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's not bad, Matt. Yeah, finally, we get, what we kind of needed this a bit. Yeah, go off on him. The guy's been, well, first of all, going to bat for absolutely terrible views, but also like just argued in defense of pedophilia, acted as though like you were the issue with it, and tried to interrupt you. Remember, the first interruption that we saw in this series of debates was in the first one, where Matt briefly interjected and Daniel it was like acted as though he had been interrupting constantly the whole time. Like he was just so offended by it. Matt pushed back on the interruptions later when Daniel tried to do it again. Daniel only cares about interruptions because it's stopping him from speaking. He doesn't care about the civility. What he cares about is the ability to express his views uncontested. So, especially like here where he's like trying to interrupt or whatever, like it's fine. Crack in and yeah, be clear about it. What you just advocated for is fucking kids and it's terrible. Don't do that. Yeah, I didn't see it coming either, Kamigal, but I'm glad it happened. This is what I meant. Like, tell him to shut the fuck up in those terms. You need to break from the civility because the civility is only hindering you and only making it seem like this is a person worth treating civilly. He's not.
Tell the people in this country that are following secular humanism. Tell them they need to hear it more than anyone.
Secular
humanists who are
secular
who
humanists.
are
I'm
the ones
telling
who
you,
are in-
don't fuck kids and don't advocate for it.
Yeah,
and
maybe
you
they
know what
need
the
to follow
secular
them.
humanists
Maybe
say?
they need to follow
Why
them.
would we do that? We've
Maybe they need to
never
follow
done
them.
that. Nobody's ever done that.
Maybe they need
it's
to follow
you
them.
that have done that.
By
on
the
stage.
way, like, hit him again. Point out that you worship a guy who did that. Like, hit him again. Hit him where it hurts. Like, why? Like, we really should be gloves off at this point.
Sexual revolution that had from a secular humanist
revolution
basis
was not
has
about 9-year-olds.
Yes, it was.
No,
yes,
it
it was.
wasn't.
You don't know
Remember,
about
he
the
thinks-
Sexual Liberation Front? You don't know about NAMBLA? You don't know about
NAMBLA is not a secular humanist organization. They have way more in common with you, Daniel.
all of
Oh no, sorry, I forgot. Daniel doesn't like NAMBLA because they're pedophiles that are that target little boys. But if they targeted little girls, Daniel would be on board. Sorry, I forgot. He does care a little bit because women are the ones that are supposed to have terrible things happen to them in his world. So sorry, my bad. I forgot. He doesn't actually like NAMBLA.
I know
these
about NAMBLA,
movements-
and we've worked
Yeah.
against NAMBLA.
Yes. Look at the
Unlike you,
theorists. Stop interrupting me, okay? You got
No,
it.
you have
got
a
it.
lot of
the
interruptions.
no interruption shit is done when you start
Yeah.
talking about whether or not 9-year-olds should be fucking.
Don't grandstand, okay? You're not some
This
hero.
guy
You're
coming
grandstand
from
not
as
the
some
much
side.
as I
hero.
want.
Here. Wow! Oh,
I'm
amazing.
the guy that's
wow.
here debating
Oh,
and
amazing. You're so heroic, man.
And you
You're such
want
a
to
hero.
fuck kids.
No, see, look
Yeah,
at this
say it
guy,
again.
man. Look
Hit
at
him again. Tell him again.
perverse. Look at your sick
Oh, it's
mind,
perverse.
okay?
You're the one who wants
Let's
to
My
do
give
it.
sick
man.
mind.
How about we talk about
My
your?
sick mind.
You want to talk about
the
your personal?
liar advocating for
You wanna
child
talk about-
marriage and sex.
And so,
is
by the
fucking-
way, this is like a complete devolution, right? We are now completely not debating. We're just screaming at each other on the internet. This is exactly the kind of thing that people have taken issue with internet debates, and I understand. I get it. This is not good debate. However, Daniel is being platformed, and he's going to say something. You need to address it in whatever way is appropriate. And if he ends up not debating because nobody will debate him, he'll just say it uncontested on his own channel. Once we're here, once we understand that this guy is talking, we need to do anything at all in terms of a debate, in a debate setting, to make sure that his views don't propagate. And so, no, this is like really bad debate. It's just internet blood sports. It's just entertainment, whatever else. But you got to do what you got to do when you want. When the alternative is to just let this guy spread his views.
about
Look.
my sick mind while
no, look at
inventing
this,
a
man.
fantasy.
Come on, James.
secular
Some moderation here.
Come
Oh,
on,
you want
just
some moderation?
Shouting
I'll
the
shut
F
up.
word is not an argument. Just shouting
Correct,
the F word.
and neither is saying we
Okay.
should let 9-year-olds marry.
Yeah. So we don't need to talk about personal life, okay?
Okay,
You don't
get
need to
back
make
to-
any accusations against me.
get
I don't
back to
talk
the
about your
question then.
boyfriend.
Oh,
so-
oh no, I don't think you actually do fuck children. I think you want to. You probably don't actually engage in it. But I'm sure you want to, and you want to live in a world where you could.
Don't talk about me. So
Don't
the
talk
thing
about me. So again, this is from a guy who, either directly or by implication, will slander his opponent constantly. Imply that he literally was just saying that secular humanists are in favor of NAMBLA. By the way, for those of you who don't know, NAMBLA is the North American Man Boy Love Association. It's an organization for pedophiles. And he just accused secular humanists of being in favor of that. But, oh, don't slander me. It's all nonsense. He doesn't believe in anything. Or he doesn't believe in the things he's complaining about. He doesn't believe in civility. He doesn't believe in not attacking the other person. He believes in him not being attacked. He believes in him not being interrupted.
This whole argument is that the whole point
And
of
by the
this
way, if I were
debate-
Matt, like it seems like Daniel's going to try to redirect us. If he redirects us and says like the whole debate is Islam versus secular humanism, if I were Matt, for real, I'd just be like, secular humanism, unlike Islam, is not in favor of fucking 9-year-olds. But you are. Like, for real, we don't have to talk about anything else.
debate on secular humanism is individual happiness the end-all be-all of human morality.
That is
Your
not
whole
the question
argument
at
has
hand.
been that we need to do what's best for humanity. The question is, what is actually the best for humanity?
So this is what we were talking about at the beginning. What do we mean by what is best for humanity? He's just literally said that like he is opposed to the idea that happiness is good for is best for humanity. He's going to instead say it's like obligation or duty or something like that. He's not going to put it in those terms because he understands that makes him sound like authoritarian, but he's going to lead in that direction of like the best for humanity is when people do what they're told.
Hindered pursuit of personal individual happiness going to cause the best for humanity overall? And I'm saying no, because there are other values and institutions that are worth preserving.
Like I said, there are values and institutions worth preserving. He's not going to tell you what they are, but the institutions that he says are worth preserving are all ones in which people have obligations and duties, and not ones in which people's lives become better necessarily.
To be a married person, you have to sacrifice. You cannot be
The
selfish and
sacrifice is
only
good.
care about your own desires.
By the way, when people sacrifice, they're giving of themselves to get better, right? You might put like if you have children, you might work a ton of hours so you can provide for them because you understand that what you're getting for that sacrifice is worth what you're giving. But for him, he acts as though it's like you just do it because that's your job to do it. I honestly think that Daniel is a fundamentally unfeeling person, which is why he can't grasp the concept that people do these things because it makes them happy in some way, in an indirect way. There is a goodness that they understand they're achieving, even if it doesn't come with immediate gratification, even if immediately it's hard. This is like what childbirth is about, by the way. Why people will go through that immense pain, as I understand it. I haven't birthed a child, nor do I expect I ever will. But like because what you get on the other side is child. You know, you bring a person into the world who can be happy and grow, and you get fulfillment out of them being in your life. I think for Daniel, I think he doesn't understand that. Like actually, like if we do a little bit of psychoanalyzing here, I think Daniel doesn't understand that there is a fulfillment that comes from that. For him, it's you make children because you're a woman and that's your job, and we have to like make more people, and that's like the thing that we're supposed to do. It's just authoritarianism and orders and stuff. I actually wonder maybe he's like actually a sociopath or something. I don't know. Like he feels, especially in the way he just approached that. I am realizing that he seems to be a fundamentally unfeeling person, and it makes me wonder about a lot of these things.
Or your own happiness, you have to look at a couple, a marriage. Same for a family. To preserve a family with parents and children, you have to be concerned about a collective. Same with a community.
Well,
same for society.
Hold on, because now he's talking about a collective. Yeah, but I care about the well-being and happiness of that collective as well, not to the detriment of others, but if they are fundamentally unhappy being together, it is better for them to be apart, whereas you would say that their obligation to that structure is more important.
There is a conflict between the pursuit of individual happiness and what will make me personally happy versus the needs of these other institutions. I have to sacrifice, and sometimes I have to do things that I don't actually consent to. Yet it is for the greater good of humanity.
No, okay, so this is a misunderstanding of consent. You might not like it, but you probably consented. I don't know, like unless someone's like literally threatening you or something. But are you like okay with doing things that you don't consent to? That's new from you. I guess it's under. I'm not surprised. I'm a little surprised that that you said it. I guess
that's the main problem with secular humanism, is that it prioritizes individual happiness.
So no.
So I don't know why you're thinking about my girlfriend during the debate, but she says thanks.
What?
Now,
what did you say about the girl?
back to secular humanism. See, one of us.
Oh,
showed
sorry.
up.
I thought you had a boyfriend. I didn't realize.
Keep going.
I didn't realize.
You didn't realize? You're a liar. You're a fucking liar. You're a fucking liar, and you want
to. I missed it. Did anyone catch what he said about Matt's girlfriend? I didn't catch anything about that. Maybe I misunderstood. Okay.
Kids.
I thought you were. Are you gay or not?
I'm not. I'm not gay. But if I was gay, I would be happy to say I was gay.
Okay.
Anybody here?
Oh, but don't talk about me. By the way, remember this is the guy of don't talk about me, but also like, oh, I thought you had a boyfriend. Aren't you gay? To him, by the way, that's an insult. To me, it's not. But you have to understand, this guy fucking hates gay people. So, yes, for him, that is a massive insult.
I would have a problem saying if I was gay.
He's
if I was
accusing
gay,
me of committing.
No, because it doesn't matter. This is one of the things that I.
If you're gonna let him hurl the F word at me.
Oh, hurl the F word. Oh, now you care about
the fuck I want, fucker.
Yeah,
look at
freedom
this.
of speech.
He's not personal, but I'm
it's not a magic word.
He was going to respond to you, Daniel.
No, he's.
By the way, this is the first time the moderator has jumped in here. Even in the previous debate where they were off topic, or the first debate where Matt was like, "Hey, this," or sorry, not the previous debate, the first debate where Matt was like, "Hey, what the fuck are we doing here?" Like, he's refused to argue about the topic. James didn't say anything. Now he's gonna chime in when things are getting like when Matt's finally getting mad about the incivility that Daniel has been engaging in. You can be uncivil without cursing, by the way. People pretend like civility is just you don't curse and you like speak softly, but you can be extremely rude without cursing a single time. Oh, it's very out of hand.
Highly offensive things to me right now.
You just referred to
the poor baby is like, oh, he said the F word just because I want it to be okay to marry children. Oh, he's so mean to me.
My girlfriend is my boyfriend, but I'm the one hurling highly offensive things. You know what?
I'm just learning something right now.
Let me just, you're a liar.
No shit. Yeah, look at that smile.
Let's
He
get
knows
back
he's
to this.
lying.
So one of us showed up today to debate 3 topics, and I'm the only one that addressed the first one. The second one, don't care that much about because what's compelling doesn't have any impact on what's true. But the third one's important because is the world better under secular humanism or under Islam? And did I present a hedonistic view of secular humanism that is just about? Nope, that's the straw man that Daniel constructed in his science fiction,
great. Talk to the audience.
Star Trek fantasy of what's going to actually happen if we do this. It's his metaphor for what secular humanism has done to the world. Not because there's anything demonstrably wrong about it, but because he disagrees with it. And in particular, his particular view of Islam disagrees with it. He doesn't give you
This is very good, but I really wish you'd say like he disagrees with it because he's an authoritarian.
Reason
maybe Matt
why
hasn't
secular humanism is a
diagnosed
problem. And under secular humanism, he can practice his version of Islam. He just can't marry a fucking 9-year-old.
Yeah, that's all you got. All you have is the.
That's all you got. Yeah, okay.
Attacks.
Ignore the whole argument.
So
and focus
this is an
on
interruption that we're talking about.
I'm still talking.
We're not talking about your homosexuality or whatever.
Yeah, like he's complaining about interruption, but like notice that when the interruption started in this debate, Matt was talking and Daniel would not shut the fuck up even when Matt continued. So like I don't want to hear it from him about his complaints about interruption.
The dishonest
we're not talking about homosexuality.
Responding.
We're not talking about homosexuality here. Let me get back to the debate.
We were.
So he doesn't want to talk about that because he knows most people now are in favor of or at the very least don't hate gay people. Most people are supportive of the LGBT community. So he doesn't want to talk about it, but he absolutely despises the LGBT community. It's come out in other debates. And I think I don't.
You're not familiar with a thought experiment, but it's where you go through
an
idea
with a thought
and work
experiment.
out the implication. Yeah, you're not familiar with a lot of things apparently. So
I've only taught about
Let's-
thought experiments many
come on,
times, but
James.
I'm not familiar
Some
with it.
moderation. I let him talk.
If he's
I'm
just
going
going
to
to
interrupt
accuse me of
everything he
lying,
says from
if he's
now
just
on.
going to lie and
I'm
say
going
I
to
don't know
interrupt
stuff I
everything
know,
he says from now
that's
on.
good. And I'll interrupt
going to
everything
interrupt
you say
everything
from
he
now on. And
says.
we can just sit here the
Yeah.
whole time, because as long as you're
We can
going to
do that.
lie,
We can do
I'm going to
that.
call you out for
We
your
can do
lies,
that.
you lying
So-
liar.
Yeah, I think Matt's like actually mad here, and unlike where he gets
Yeah,
heated,
so let's
I think it's
focus on the
reasonable to be
violent
upset, but
history
sadly,
of
especially like the view of civility, as a lot of people see, it sadly comes off as kind of is bad when you get angry. But I think it's reasonable to be angry here. I don't think it's bad, but I just hope that audiences viewing this don't see this as like, oh, Matt's just mad, so he's wrong. He's like, he can't keep his cool because he's getting called out or whatever. That's not what's happening, but
liberalism.
it makes me sad.
Let's
that people
look at
think
the
that.
reign of terror. Let's look at the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, the spread of democracy
secular
and human
humanists?
rights. Oh, that has nothing to do with secularism. It was people
just
like
got
you
mad about it. No,
and
it
Christopher Hitchens, for example, or Sam Harris that said
So
we need
Christopher Hitchens was in favor of the war in Iraq, one of the great tragedies of his positions. I guess he was well, in any case. But Matt isn't Christopher Hitchens. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but he is a different human, and not the same one as that one. Also, Sam Harris has his own problems. But Matt is not those people, and he says people like you because they're atheists. But that is not like a secular humanist position. Also, you want to know who was actually in favor of that? American politicians, people who are not secular humanists, people who are often Christian. It's not secular humanism. But he wants to attribute to a person, it's guilt by association, literally.
need to bring democracy to Iraq, democracy to Afghanistan. They don't have women's rights. So let's bomb them. And even if we have to nuke Mecca, I believe that's what Sam Harris said, that's the price we're willing to pay for the spread of liberal human rights. Those people all claim to be humanists. They all claim to be fighting for the benefit of humanity. They all
don't.
claim to be fighting
Exactly
for
those two
liberation and equality and consent and women's rights and
Oh, and by the way, Christopher Hitchens' support for the war in Iraq was not on the basis of what he's talking about here. Christopher Hitchens basically said that the UN has 4 criteria by which they think it is appropriate to violate the consent of a country, or sorry, not the consent, violate the sovereignty of a country. Any one of them is sufficient, and Iraq had violated all 4. Now, the reason why the U.S. went in was not to deal with these human rights abuses or whatever else, and that was the real problem. But understanding that he's not in favor of just like bombing them to shit so we can steal their oil is relevant here. He was in favor of ousting Saddam Hussein, who was a tyrannical, brutal dictator.
Gay rights and transgender rights, all of these things that claim to be part of your value system, they were also advocating. But you conveniently, like all of these atheists, want to wipe
By the way, this is the same guy who will be like, oh, if you talk about terrorism, like, you're just associating me with these. First of all, you like terrorism. But, like, if you do that, he'll be like, oh, you're just conflating or whatever. But these two people who are also atheists happen to agree with this thing that was bad. Therefore, that is a secular humanist thing that you also agree with. None of that makes sense.
hands of that. That's a complete cop-out response. The values that you uphold are a part of the values that were spread throughout the world by force, brutal, violent.
In fact, one of the big problems in Iraq post American invasion was that they did not actually get a democracy.
I mentioned many historical examples up until today. It's still happening. It's still happening with an international human rights law, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's all based on secular humanism.
No,
but you don't want to take ownership of that. That law is imposed. If you violate the Universal Declaration,
remember him complaining about grandstanding? How long? He's just going on and on and on.
Declaration of Human Rights and international law, the UN will place sanctions on you. You have a security.
And this is what I mean about like the insistence on non-interruption. Is he wants to go on for 3 minutes about how his opponent agrees with everything that happened in Iraq, and it's his ideology that's in favor of it, even though he couldn't possibly derive a reason why secular humanism would lead to the invasion of Iraq and how he wants to do all these things. And if his opponent is disallowed from interrupting him, he gets to speak uncontested. He gets to filibuster. He gets to lie. He gets to slander his opponent. But if he does it without cursing, he gets to pretend like he's the one being civil. He's accused Matt of being in favor of nuking Mecca because Sam Harris said it. Again, Matt Dillahunty is a different human than Sam Harris.
Council that will punish you as a nation and starve you to death because you do not.
Meanwhile, by the way, he wants to pretend like the thing he said, which was, in favor of marrying children, is not indicative of his beliefs. But what Sam Harris said is indicative of Matt Dillahunty's beliefs. Just to be clear.
Hold those specific values. The analogy or metaphor with the pleasure machine is exactly correct. This is exactly what happens. They will bomb you, starve your children to death, and say, look, we're just trying to liberate you. We just want the best for humanity.
By the way, even in his own metaphor, it doesn't work because remember the idea of the pleasure machine, it was to make people happy. Those people who were bombed and starving and destitute, they're not happy. That's not what happened. It's not like, oh, cool, I don't have food. That's great. I'm happy now. That's not what happened. This is antithetical to the only value that he has acknowledged that secular humanists have. But he is comfortable assigning it to people who believe in this. Oh yeah, you're only interested in happiness. That's why you bombed these people and left them starving and homeless. How does that make sense at all?
Humanity. That's why we have these laws. We are creating an international order of rules, and it's a rules-based order.
And by the way, those people who are starving, I don't want to say like they're better off because that's really shitty. What I mean is, at a minimum, and it's not good enough. At least they're not being fucking gassed by Saddam. Like understand what we're talking about. Like, what their position isn't good, and it's a travesty that what has been done to the people of Iraq. It was also a travesty that Saddam Hussein was killing those same people. But he only takes issue with the American intervention, which again, bad. It's not good that these people were bombed and left starving and just so America could steal their oil or whatever. But they're not being gassed at least. Small solace.
Obey or you will die. That's the history of secular humanism. You don't want to acknowledge that history.
Well, because it's a lie, and here's why. First of all, I'm not Sam Harris, and I disagree with Sam on a number of things. I'm also not Christopher Hitchens, and I think he was monumentally wrong.
Correct. The biggest problem that atheists and secular humanists have with Christopher Hitchens was his support of the Iraq War. That is the number one thing people take issue with from him that are otherwise fans of him.
War. And while I served in the military for 8 years, I have massive objections to what our Christian-led country did to try to put democracy everywhere. They fucked the world up.
Also, that was always a lie. The democracy thing was always a lie. We know that. It's so weird that we're acting like that was actually the intent. It was always a lie. If the actual goal was to oust this tyrannical, murderous dictator, and allow the people a democracy so that they could govern themselves, it would have been far more justifiable. But that's not actually what was going on. That was the lie that was told to make people okay with what was happening.
They helped create more people who hate this country and more people who are now compelled to become jihadis than to become secularists, because the United States is not secular humanism in action. And in just the same way that he represented the United States Revolution as if it was the principle of secular humanism didn't exist until 1963 with the first Humanist Manifesto. You don't get to saddle everything that isn't Islam under secular humanism. And as secular humanists are here in
That's really smart from Matt, by the way, because he's right. Daniel just calls anything that's not his specific view of Islam whatever he's debating against. In this case, it's secular humanism, but he's done this with liberalism or happiness, I guess. Like this. That's why it's the pleasure machine. It's the force of everything he hates rolled up and combined into one. It's. I'm glad that Matt pointed it out. That it's just the things I hate are the thing that I'm going to attach to you.
United States fighting for equality and freedom that allows you to be a Muslim and Mike to be a Christian and me to be an atheist. It wasn't secular humanism that sent people out and tried to conquer Iraq. And it wasn't me, so don't fucking saddle me with your delusion of what you think I believe. Let's address what I actually think and say, like I've done with you.
Right. Oh, okay. So almost perfect. So I love it. It's like, let's address what I actually think and say. You can throw in a little bit of what that is here if you want. Not necessary. But then say, like I've done with you when you said it was okay to marry children. Like, just a like, little bit of extra, like, remind the audience, this guy is not actually here for what is good. Like, this guy is disingenuous when he's acting like he cares about these other people. He's on board for all kinds of suffering, as long as it's at his hands or the hands of people who think like him.
Yeah, very convenient. You can mention 9/11. You can mention all kinds of terrorist attacks to
I mean,
attack
you like
my
those
position
things.
and
You
attack
said you
Islam.
liked those things,
Islam
but
condemns
that's okay.
terrorism. It attacks killing civilians.
Well, also, he asked you, the first question he asked you in this portion is whether Islam supports terrorism or is uniquely bad at preventing it. He asked you to address the issue of the association, or address the association between terrorism and Islam, which, as it turns out, there's a lot of Muslim terrorists, my dude. And you declined to answer. So
purposes of war. So you can saddle me with that. No
And in
problem.
your
You can
opening,
just have a cute little
you
hashtag
malign people who would
boomer
accuse others of terrorism. So
joke about it. But when I
Boomer, I'm
point
a
out
millennial.
when I point out all
That's
of
a
these,
millennial?
well, you don't age well, my friend.
Oh.
So when I
This is what I mean about you can be uncivil without cursing, and it's mean. But I was also surprised that Matt's a millennial. I guess millennial goes to what? It starts in like 1980. I guess okay. No, that's not okay. If he's like barely a millennial, then that makes sense. He does look a little bit older than like in his 30s, is what I mean to say. I mean, sure, that's mean or whatever, but yeah. More importantly, remember he was complaining about, oh, you're so uncivil. You said the F word. Oh, dearie me. Oh, my poor heart can't take it. But okay, whatever. Like, he doesn't care.
talk about all of the tens of millions
Classy
killed,
to the end.
tens of millions that are killed by your ideology.
Tens of millions. Oh, we've upped the number. It was hundreds of thousands earlier. Tens of millions, and by your ideology. Again, not his ideology, but sure, whatever.
Secular
They're
humanism
not killed
is
by
a
my ideology. No, nobody's been killed by my ideology. Nobody's been killed by my ideology. Nobody's been killed by my.
Yeah, deny it.
Say
Okay,
it.
we heard it.
Has anybody been killed
Yes,
because of my? You're
tens
a
of
liar.
millions.
You're
Okay,
lying.
fine.
You are a liar.
Tens
Okay,
of
fine.
millions.
He doesn't care.
Your
He's gonna
hands are
keep saying
bloody
it.
with the
My
blood
hands
of
are not
millions.
bloody. And
Yes,
they're
they
also
are.
not
You literally
groping
went to war.
children.
Like, you're the last person.
So, okay. He's like, you literally went to war. You're the last person. Not everyone who was in the military has gone to war, even during the Iraq War. Maybe Matt was sent overseas. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was in a combat position. Maybe he wasn't. There's a lot of aspects of the military that have nothing to do with going to war specifically. Even someone like, how do troops get from the U.S. to Iraq? Someone flies them, right? They fly a passenger plane or a cargo plane or something like that from the U.S. to Iraq. That plane is flown by military personnel. That person isn't going to war, right? Like, not in the way we usually think of it.
Come on, man. Look at this. Yeah, look at this.
I'm sorry you have to live up to your
And he
words.
whines about being classy. Look at that. I call him a boomer.
It is classy. Is defending kids classy? I think so.
Chill, man. Chill.
Yeah, this
Chill.
is what I mean
You
about,
have no
coming
real
off as
argument.
cool off.
You have no real
I have
argument.
no
from
real
this guy.
argument.
Other
The guy
than
who presented
that's
no
not the
real
debate.
argument
Oh,
all
you
night is
F
saying I
this
don't
and
have a
you
real
F
argument.
that. You want to F that.
All I've
That's
done is
all your
curse.
argumentation is about.
All I've
based
done
on.
is curse.
Yeah, it's really easy for Daniel to to impugn Matt for not having said anything of substance when he just simply ignores all the things of substance that Matt has said. Obviously, it's one of those, like, the only thing you can really do at this point is make it clear how untrustworthy Daniel is to the audience, because he is at this point in full outright open lie mode. Before he was trying to hide it, but now he's literally lying about what he just heard. Like, oh, deny it. No, I've told you what you said is wrong, and you're just saying it again. It's just open lying. You just need to make sure that the audience cannot possibly think he's believable.
James, that's
All
amazing.
you've done is, oh, that's not the debate topic. Oh, where's the scientific evidence?
Sorry,
Oh,
you
you
never
want to
stay on the debate
you
topic.
want to F kids, dude.
So civil, man. You're so civil, dude. I'm blown away by how civil you are.
That's
Not-
your whole debate.
Not my fault. You're a grown
What's
up.
the
You can
debate?
say fuck. It's okay.
Yeah.
So we have about
Yeah, so secular humanism is a variant of liberalism. All of the values that you claim as a secular
Is
humanist.
that true? I don't think it is. No, I wouldn't. No, I don't think I agree. Maybe it's I don't know. It's meaningfully divorced from liberalism in that a secular humanist does not have to be does not have to be like a capitalist, whereas like to be a liberal you kind of do. Like a secular humanist doesn't have to doesn't have to be even necessarily like representative democracy. To be a liberal you like kind of do. I don't know. Like it seems like moderately derived from, but like some of the principles, but more thoroughly. I don't know. But of course, like his problem with liberalism is that it's in any way freeing from the shackles of the authoritarianism that he wants.
That you cited in your opening statement were also the values that were cited as the justification for the invasion of Iraq, sanctions of many Muslim countries.
Wow, people lied about their beliefs to do a bad thing, and that's the fault of the people who actually hold those beliefs. Wow, if only there were some comparison to like violent acts that were done like in the name maybe of like Islam or something that was like similar in the way. I wonder if I don't know. I wonder if there's a similar connection
around the world.
Can't think
the
of
invasion
anything.
of Afghanistan, those secular values were cited as the justification. That's why they call it Operation Iraqi Freedom. That's not a coincidence. Now, you want to wash your hands of that very conveniently. That's fine. I'm not saying you personally supported those wars.
You did.
My argument is that your ideology was the basis as a justification,
But it wasn't.
for those
That's a
wars
lie,
and that
is the
invasion.
problem.
I'll ask you a very simple
People,
question.
like,
Do
okay,
you believe
again,
in
so like to make this clear in case anyone's like unsure, like you can imagine a person who, like, let's imagine Daniel specifically, and let's say hypothetically he went out and like committed some crime, like maybe he murdered someone, and he said, I did this because I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus, and he compelled me to kill this person. Would Christianity be on the, like, would you blame Christianity for that? No, he's clearly lying about what he believes. He obviously isn't a Christian. He has spent his entire online career demonstrating that fact. But he said it, so doesn't that make him? No, obviously not. So just the fact that the U.S. claimed that the invasion of Iraq was to instill democracy, and we were, it's about Iraqi freedom, and we're just there for to spread freedom and democracy and the good things. It was always a lie. We knew it was always a lie. But he's holding to account. Why? Because it's helpful for him, right? He doesn't actually care. He probably doesn't even believe what he's saying. But it's something that he can even tenuously pin on his opponent. Say, look, you're a bad person for you're bad. Your ideology is bad because I can erroneously attach this accusation to it. By the way, the accusations of terrorism that you can attach to Islam are completely unreasonable, even though I'm doing literally the same thing. It's actually worse than the association of Islam and terrorism, because Muslim terrorists tend to be authentically Muslim. It's just they might be, it might not be all the way to the top that it's that authentic kind of thing.
international law based on secular humanism, not the manifesto that no one knows about and no one has read, but the secular humanism, the idea of separation of church and state, individual happiness, equality, etc.
So again, like, even by these terms, you can demonstrate the lie. Separation of church and state. I don't know how much that like became a thing in Iraq. Don't they still have a state religion? A national religion? I'm not actually sure. That one we can leave aside because obviously that had nothing to do with what was going on. But like individual happiness, are the people happier now? No. So clearly, like, what did it make sense to you that like dropping bombs on them would make them happier? No. Then maybe that's not what they were trying to do.
Those values that I focused on in my opening, do you think that
What
should
values?
be the basis of international
What values did you
law?
focus
And
on?
should there be consequences for violating international law?
Didn't I make a very express thing in my opening about the separation of church and state and how I would be fine, and I'm a secular humanist, and I would be fine with a secular state, but not a secular humanist state. Didn't I make that clear? I thought so.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
yeah.
Secular. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly
so-
why I'm attacking.
So you're equating secular with secular humanism. And so anything that's secular is bad, right?
No, I said that secular humanism is a sub-ideology of liberalism.
Which is not
The
true.
values in liberalism include value for
You cannot
freedom.
attach, like, that's the thing, like, he's trying to attach like a bunch of stuff that exist in liberalism that don't exist in secular humanism. That said, like, he also doesn't actually give a shit about what liberalism actually is. So what he's going to talk about here is like, it's not really relevant whether it's associated with liberalism at all.
Value for equality,
you're
maximizing
opposed to
freedom and
freedom?
equality.
Yes,
No,
he is
I
opposed
say
to freedom
that
and
should be
equality.
balanced
Yes.
by other concerns like
Me too.
marriage, family, community.
I don't know that marriage.
You should have pressed on that. Yes, he thinks that individual freedom and happiness is bad. He hates those things. And he just lied to you and said, no, they should be balanced by these other things. Marriage, family, community. None of that means anything except to say, I think there are good reasons to restrict human freedom and happiness. I will use these three things at a minimum as an excuse to do so.
Marriage and community are necessarily the parts, but I'm not opposed to either one of them.
But that's the conflict. Sometimes marriage.
But if you're gonna,
Oh,
but
sorry,
if
I
you're
thought you
gonna,
didn't like
but if you're
interruptions, my
gonna,
dude.
we both want freedom.
He
And
doesn't.
you can't just cite, well, freedom is the problem.
That's not what I said.
It is.
I said freedom is a
Liberal-
value. Freedom is a value, but it should not be the only value that
I
we
didn't say
maximize.
it was.
Okay.
By
so
the
what
way,
are-
to be clear about like how much he's hiding his actual beliefs, I can agree that freedom should not be the only value, right? We can imagine a world where people are maximally free, in which there are no restrictions on what they are allowed to do, and then like you have the state of nature. I would argue that that's not maximally free, but even still, right? Like we can understand that maybe like human well-being should also be a thing that's relevant, right? Maybe you're maximally free in a world where like if each human is separate on their own planet or whatever, and you know they're free to do whatever they want, they can't harm anyone and nothing restricts them, but they're not happy, right? Like there's no well-being there. That would be bad. Sure, fine, whatever. But Daniel hasn't suggested other values. Now he's claimed that they should be offset by things like family, marriage, community, but those aren't values. Those are institutions. The values that he actually cares about, he hasn't said even once. Now, I can tell you what they are, and I think I've done so, and I think I've made clear enough what his implications, what his values are. But he hasn't said them because he understands that if he said them out loud, people would recognize him for what he is. So he gestures at values by pointing to these things, and I think you could really hold him down and just go, not literally, obviously, but like in the debate, you can be like, okay, let's talk about what values we should include otherwise. Tell me some of those values. Now, he might try to dance around a little bit if he tries to do the family, marriage, community thing. Be like, those aren't values, those are institutions. Give me values. But like, tie him down. Get him to say outright duty. And then obligation, and then you can make it clear to the audience from there. He does not care about what's good for people. He cares only that people follow what their obligations are as set forth by him. He'll claim that it comes from his religion. I don't know how much that's true. I don't know how much this guy is just a psychopath or a sociopath, I guess, and like therefore liked the authoritarianism of Islam, or if he was raised Muslim and because he's a sociopath, like is running with it, like bought into it. I don't know which one came first, but clearly, so like maybe the rules don't derive from him. Maybe they derive from Islam or whatever. But the point is, the authoritarianism and the totalitarianism he wants, that's the virtue that's the value he's talking about.
Other
You're going to
value.
straw man me.
So what other value? So for example,
No, you tell me.
in
What other
marriage,
values?
you have
Consent.
certain obligations. You have when you sign a marriage contract.
By the
traditionally,
way, why are those?
that
Why do you have those
requires
obligations? But okay.
giving up certain rights, giving up certain duties.
You don't,
if
by
a
the way,
person
give up
just wants
certain
to
rights. So he thinks you give up certain rights in the sense that like you have given up the right to have sex with other people. That would be like a violation of your oath, but it wouldn't be illegal, nor should it be. It's rude, and you shouldn't do it. But like violating someone's trust is the problem, right? You've hurt your partner by violating their trust by being unfaithful. But yeah, Daniel would have that be illegal, and that's much worse than like the restriction of like, oh, you can be accused of adultery and who knows what happens to you. By the way, some Muslim countries will punish women for adultery because they've been raped. Daniel probably would be on board for that, by the way. But he won't, like, he hasn't said enough for me to like conclusively know that, but I'm confident. I would be surprised if he wasn't on board for it. And this is what I mean, like, he's not going to actually say the values that he believes in.
Opt out of that
But
because
but
they're
you're
just
gonna
not
find
happy
them.
with a marriage anymore. Should they be able to
Divorce?
do that?
Should divorce be allowed? Yes, I'm in favor of divorce. I'm actually divorced.
No fault divorce.
Well,
So no fault divorce is the like. This is the like place that the authoritarians have backed up to. They're opposed to divorce. Period. They understand though that that's too extreme a claim to start with. So you gradually try to roll back in the same way that progress is gradually made. And so you say no fault divorce. What is no fault divorce? In case anyone is unfamiliar, that is the ability to get divorced without having to cite a fault on the other person's part, on the other person. So like adultery or abuse or so on and so forth. Without no fault divorce is a paradigm. With only divorce with fault, you would have to demonstrate that your partner has done something that is of sufficient fault to allow for you to be divorced. And if you couldn't demonstrate that, maybe because you just couldn't prove that they were beating you, or you just couldn't prove they were cheating on you or whatever else, then you're stuck. The value of no fault divorce is that you don't have to fucking prove in court how terrible your partner's being. And also sometimes it's worth getting out of a relationship even if the fault isn't something that the state will recognize. Right? Like, they might recognize physical abuse, but they probably wouldn't recognize emotional abuse. People shouldn't be trapped in marriages where they're being emotionally abused either. So they pretend like no fault divorce is like meaningfully different as a thing to complain about. There's no chance that this guy is in favor of divorce at all, even with the fault thing. He is also almost certainly, if he is okay with divorce, almost certainly only if it's initiated by the man. And of course, gay marriage would not be allowed in his world. So he pretends to be more moderate with this no fault thing, but it's another deception.
no fault divorce gets more into politics and financing, but I don't know necessarily which version of divorce is better. But since I'm still really good friends with my ex-wife, I should probably message her and see if she's okay with the way we got divorced. We don't seem to have a problem with it.
Or for example, like within marriage, you're not allowed to sleep with whoever you want, right?
So, allowed is a weird word here. You are allowed. There's no cosmic force that prevents you, and it's not illegal. You are not allowed in the sense that you have agreed to an obligation to another person, but that obligation exists just as much with committed partners who are unmarried. Like I have a girlfriend, Amazon Kane. I've talked about her on stream before. If I cheated on her, it would be just as bad as if we were married. It would be just as hurtful to her. It's one of the many reasons I wouldn't do it. But the point is, it is. Would that be not allowed? Well, in the same way, in terms of like social obligations, like and social agreements, yes. But what Daniel means, no, it's different. He would have it be illegal. And that's very different and far more. This is what I mean about like the authoritarianism. He doesn't care about the marriage part. He wants the control over people to make illegal actions he doesn't like. And I agree. I think cheating is bad. You shouldn't cheat on your partner. But I don't think the law should come down on you if you do. I think that's actually pretty messed up. Especially because then you could also like you can manufacture that, right? Like there's all sorts of stuff.
My wife was allowed to sleep with whoever she wanted while we were together.
But
is that
open
good?
relationships. Is that a good thing?
Yeah,
Did
for
that
them.
help preserve your marriage?
Yeah.
For most people, it doesn't, because when a spouse.
So that's also not true. So for most people do not have open relationships. For the people who do, tends to work pretty well. That's why they do it. Like they agree to this. This isn't a thing of like with Matt's. If I'm understanding what Matt's relationship was like with his ex-wife, like it wasn't that she just started cheating on him and he said it was fine. Is they had an agreement. She wasn't violating his trust, and he wasn't violating hers when they would sleep with other people. But Daniel would have that be illegal, punishable by the law, and probably in a pretty extreme way.
I wouldn't think
for
so.
most people.
It's not cheating.
Yes,
It's not cheating.
Whatever you want.
Infidelity and cheating are not the same thing, by the way.
When
No,
a
it's not
spouse is
cheating.
involved with other people, that will biologically reduce the attraction that the male feels for his spouse.
First of all, that's not true. Second of all, even if it was true, what does that have to do with anything? It's still not cheating. That has nothing to do with whether it's cheating or not. You would get mad if your partner slept with someone else, but that's also because you're, one, really, really creepy, right? Like you've already advocated for child marriage. But two, you're an authoritarian. You want to own women, and the idea that another man has been with a woman makes you feel like they have owned her before. You own her less.
That is
I think
part
that
of
might
the
be
reason
totally true by Matt. What do you mean, Kim Gao?
why marriage customs throughout the world involve fidelity.
Yeah.
You have to be
Often, but not always. By the
faithful
way,
to your-
marriage as Daniel sees it does not involve fidelity because he is also in favor of men having multiple wives. I've heard that called polygamy, but I'm not sure if polygamy means that women can also have multiple husbands. And he does not believe in that. So no, you in a way cheat on your wife by having sex with a different wife or whatever. It's you're violating your fidelity to one with another, and there's like no world where that makes any sense. And also, why should it be different between, right? Why is it biologically, according to him, biologically men are less attracted to women if they've been with another man, but women aren't less attracted to men if they've been with another woman? Like it's all nonsense. He doesn't believe any of it. So it's all lies. It's just he's trying to justify to an audience who believes very different things from him, to justify or trying to convince them to agree with him anyway.
your spouse. That's part of being in a marriage. So if you want to
deceit.
preserve marriage, you have to restrict someone's
And by the way,
freedom
preserving
to
marriage, why
sleep
should we
with
preserve
whoever
marriage?
they want. If you say
Marriage should be preserved if it's good for people, if people get something out of it. And in as far as it does, it should be preserved. And in as far as it doesn't, it shouldn't be.
no, freedom is most important. They should be able to sleep with whoever they want.
Not
That
necessarily.
undermines the institution of marriage. Why? Because there's this biological attachment that's destroyed when your spouse
destroyed
sleeps with
whatsoever.
other people.
Yeah. So
This is nonstop.
this notion that I have no problem with marriage. I have no problem with people being in monogamous, committed
yeah, if that's
relationships.
what you want, good.
I'm
I
in
hope
one
it brings
now.
you happiness.
And I've been in
Does
one
me.
before. The notion that your marriage is right for everybody else is problematic. There are plenty of people who have marriages that are different. There are sometimes two men who get married and it works out. Two women get married and it works out. Evidently there's some polygamists that do it and it works out. I don't get it because it's not me. It's not anything that I want to participate in.
Well, see,
But-
the whole premise was, do you
but-
value marriage? Not you're okay
but-
with marriage. Because if you
What do you
value
mean by
something, then
value
what
it?
kind of policies would you put in place to preserve that institution? To preserve that institution?
I
I
would
don't.
allow
I
people
think
to
that
become
that an
married and not
institution that has to be
move on
preserved
past
through
that.
policy probably isn't nearly as valuable as you think it is.
Ooh,
Okay,
that's
then what
actually a good
about the
point.
policy?
But also like, okay, let's try to answer that question as he presented, dishonest as it is. Like, well, what do we mean by preserve it? Like, I would preserve marriages in as far as they're good for people. So people should be allowed to be divorced. People probably shouldn't be allowed to get married if they're. People definitely should not be allowed to get married if they're below the age of consent. They should be able to enter in with an understanding of what they're agreeing to. There probably shouldn't be much past that. The ability to get divorced, all right, sure. There probably should not be tax breaks for being married because, or at the very least, if there are tax breaks for that, there should be tax breaks for just being in a committed relationship. I don't even know. No, like, I don't really know necessarily that there should be. Like, why do we need to promote it necessarily? Why should there be an advantage for being married? I don't know. I don't think there necessarily should be. But that's about it. But for him, he would say no, it should be illegal to get divorced. He claims no fault divorce, but no, he would make it illegal to get divorced, illegal to cheat on your spouse. Not just like it's rude and it's bad, and now they have reason to divorce you or whatever, but like you can be punished by the state. He would make it legal for men to have multiple wives, but not for women to have multiple husbands. So on and so forth.
Policies for scientific education. Like, what if there are countries that are like, we don't need any scientific education, there's only religious education, and actually we're not going to educate most of the population. Would you have a problem with that? Should there be a policy in place that no, every country has to implement this type of educational model?
Yeah, probably.
I don't think I get to decide what model another country does, but I can certainly speak out about how.
So this is the pseudo-authoritarian that people who don't understand what what freedom is will often levy. I've been accused of authoritarianism because like I want people to not be allowed to do bad things, but what I mean by that is like, okay, who are you to tell another group of people, another place in the world how to live? Well, I feel like I'm a person who understands some amount of ethics, and while I don't have the correct solutions to, while I don't have a solution to all issues, I think it would be good if there were an international prohibition on slavery, for example. I think I am justified in saying that no country, I don't care, no country should be allowed to have to allow slavery. I don't care what their culture is like. I think I'm justified in that, and I don't think it's authoritarian to do so either. And if you do think that, first of all, I disagree with you. But like, I can make this even more clear. Slavery was the obvious example, but even more obvious than that would be murder. No, I don't think it's cool for murder to be okay anywhere on the globe. I don't care what your culture is. It's not a cultural issue. And so while it seems like authoritarian that you dictate to a country, yeah, you have to educate your populace, what actually happens is an increase of freedom, because you restrict the ability for the powerful to oppress the powerless. You increase the ability for people to understand the world, to enrich their lives. An educated person, or someone who has access to education, has access to a more fulfilled life than someone who is prohibited from an education. It's a good for people inherently. And so, no, wouldn't like advocate for invasions or whatever. There are definitely better solutions than imperialism for these problems. But yeah, I would advocate for countries to allow for education. One of the things that comes up with this is that many Muslim majority countries in particular, have had issues where the girls in those countries are not allowed to get an education, and when they try to do so, sometimes become the victims of terrorist attacks or other reprisals. And that's far worse than saying no, they should be allowed to get an education. They should be allowed to improve themselves. And it's good if they do.
Be harming or depriving their citizens of a robust education by denying it. I would prefer that they permit it and then allow freedom. That's the thing. That's the thing with freedom. If you want to say, oh, we should deny this type of education because we want to preserve this particular society, that's a problem. That's the problem that you built your entire metaphor around, is there are freedoms that you don't want to allow because you're terrified of what will happen in the world if you allow them. You
I
don't
don't
get
think
to
that's entirely
decide for the
true.
world.
I think it's
and
more
that's why
hatred than
secular
fear, but-
humanism is better than your version of Islam. Because
you get to
under
decide.
mine, you get to keep thinking this and living the life that you and whoever you convince to actually be with you want to live within reason until they come in conflict. And then somebody's got to step in.
So, is there any obligation for children to go to school?
I think so.
I am a fan of providing required public education.
So it's required. So you're a fan
this is,
of
again,
imposing without a child.
This is what people who again don't understand freedom or like will lie about it will pretend is authoritarianism when it makes the population freer. Part of why mandatory education is a good thing is that when it's not mandatory, the poorest kids will not go to school because they're trying to earn money, because their family needs it to survive, and it exacerbates the problems of poverty. Now, poverty is a problem unto itself that needs to be solved, but one of the mechanisms that helps with poverty, it is woefully insufficient, is education. It is often seen as the great equalizer in that way, and a good education. So one of the problems of like schools being underfunded, is another problem on top of that. But like making sure that kids will have to go to school and not get pulled out because they're poor and they have to work stops a doom spiral is the idea. Daniel's going to pretend it's authoritarian because you're making a thing. Not every instance of law is authoritarian. The easy example of this is there are laws against murder. You are freer because people can't murder you, even though you have lost the ability to murder.
They be placed into schooling.
So
where
I'm
they
an
learn
education rapist.
Where they learn. Yeah, so you don't believe in consent. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Laugh it up, you.
So
300-pound gorilla.
Here's the thing that Daniel doesn't seem to understand.
Here's
the thing that
whenever you get caught on inconsistency, you make a joke or you blast the F word. Whenever you're caught out on an inconsistency, you just blurt out the F word.
So the point here is that Daniel's trying to talk over it to make sure Matt cannot explain his point, so that he can just make the accusation and run away. He understands that Matt, even given a minute to speak, will make obvious how much of a fucking moron Daniel is just being.
You make a joke for your plant to laugh at.
Time I have a
hoping
good
that he
point
can bait Matt into talking about anything.
That he knows
whenever
coming,
you don't have an
tries
answer,
to talk over me.
Whenever you don't have an answer, you have to make a dumb joke.
I have an answer. If you shut the fuck up, I tell you.
Oh, big man, come and say that right here.
Come and say
Are
right
you
where?
really trying to fight?
Here.
All right, guys.
Chill out. I don't do anything. I'm not violent.
Go ahead,
Gentlemen,
do it.
all right.
I'm saying I have an answer.
Sit down.
I do like the like he's demonstrating that Daniel's just posturing here, but it does come off like he's trying to fight, even though Daniel literally just implied like, hey, come fight me, big man. Like massive keyboard warrioring.
Sit down.
Okay, I'll sit down. You said
Sit
that
down.
to come over there and say it. I'm not violent. I would never do
You
anything.
can't
violent.
respond to any
He's
point.
trying
you just make
to.
a joke.
I can't respond to any
So
point
you
'cause
do
won't
believe
shut the
in
fuck
schooling
up.
rape.
So
you believe in.
Do you want an answer? Or do you
educational
want to
rape?
He's willing to do this, like for real. Like you see how like this is what I mean about him being dishonest about like you called me, you said I'm like a pedophile or whatever. Well, I mean you are, but also like you don't care. You're willing to do this. Just like hit him back with it. Be like, all right, I'll you know what? I'll own up to saying that children must receive an education, and I will argue that position against you, the pedophile.
pretending that I don't have
You're a believer in educational rape, okay?
James,
You don't want an answer.
I
is the
bet
truth.
your
man?
boyfriend finds you
He
really
doesn't want an
attractive.
answer.
Oh yeah, here's the
He doesn't want an
accusation
answer.
of being gay.
He'd rather pretend I don't have
You
one.
believe you're a fan of educational
Oh,
rape.
if you haven't seen something
Do you
go
want
off
an
the
answer,
rails
or
with
are you
Special
gonna
Captain Gal,
pretend
let
I
me
don't
tell
have
you,
one?
it
'Cause
gets
I
much
fucking
worse
got
than
one.
this.
You said it. You made a joke, but that's the reality. You're a fan of forcing children without consent to go into schools where they will be subjected to a scientific worldview
Well, they'll
that'll
be
affect their.
subjected to truth and facts, and how dare you? Yeah, like again, the guy's against education, but if he can mask it, he can make it seem like you, the person in favor of education, are doing the bad thing, and not him, who would make sure that you could not be educated. So that's something I want to note, is that he's pretending like the choice is what he's after, but he would have education be illegal. If those are the choices between you must go to school or you can't go to school, first of all, the you must go to school is not authoritarian. But if we're going to act like that's authoritarian, both are. And we simply have a choice about which thing to do. One is very bad for the world and one is very good for the world. Daniel wants the bad thing, but he'll pretend like it's an objection based on freedom when it's not.
Entire lives at the deepest level, you have no problem with the lack of consent in that situation.
How terrified he is of my answer. And he wants to prop up his straw man again about what I'm actually saying.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that Daniel doesn't understand about consent and about parenthood. Parents don't own their children. You don't. You are the caretakers of those children. You are instilled with a responsibility to raise responsible members of society and to teach them the minimal things that they will need to carry on a productive life when you're not around. One of the ways that we do that is through a tax-supported public school system, because parents are not equipped to work multiple jobs and teach their kids quite often. Some of them aren't qualified to teach their kids at all. And so we come up with a standardized curriculum that we put in public schools, which represents in some cases at least the bare minimum of reading, writing, arithmetic, things like civics and stuff like that, because those are the things that kids are going to need to know when they come to be responsible adults, when it's time for them to vote.
When you put it in those terms, it becomes a lot clearer. Do you want people to know what they need to exist in the world or not? If you want them to, then yes, they need an education. It's wild. Like, it's so crazy because a few times as I've been like getting upset about the monstrous things that Daniel says, I do feel like the brave soy speech guy of like, yeah, I'm like, oh, so brave. We should probably have some amount of freedom and not be authority. Like, I know what I'm saying isn't like that controversial, but you have to understand the person we're arguing with. And it's wild. Like, this guy is opposed to the concepts of freedom, happiness, well-being, education. And so it seems a little ridiculous. It feels a little ridiculous to argue against something that we've so universally agreed our positions or whatever. But this is the guy we're dealing with.
It's time for them to decide if they're going to join the military. When it's time for them to choose for themselves as an act of freedom what religion, if any, they wish to follow. That is why I'm not only a fan of...
Yeah, as a note, that's a good point. Is like Daniel would claim it's violating children's consent to make sure they have an education, but he has no problem for telling them you are this religion, these are the things you believe. It's indoctrinating them as opposed to educating them.
Public education. I'm not only a fan of
He's also okay
public
with
education.
People marrying children.
I think that raising the next generation of kids to understand how the world around them works so that they can function well within it is a moral duty.
If Matt finished this portion of the debate, it doesn't have to be now because they have a few more minutes, it seems like, if he laid out, here are the things Daniel took issue with. Freedom, happiness, education, well-being, the things he likes, domination, subservience, authoritarianism.
There's your answer.
Yeah, so you're a fan of educational rape.
Didn't listen
Basically,
to any of it.
you believe that you should compel children to go into these school systems where they're taught your atheistic standards of scientific evidence, the only things that are true that can be scientifically proven. That is justifying atheism. You're indoctrinating children with atheism within those school systems because you're teaching a scientific worldview. There is no...
By the way, as evidence about like why it's not indoctrinating with atheism, more people in the United States are religious than atheist, and they all go through the school system. Every single one of them.
Choice that parents should have in that.
By
there's no choice on the part of parents. That system is imposed. You have no choice as a parent. In certain countries, in the U.S., we still have homeschooling options, but they're...
But of course, like the people like him who are opposed to this, in favor of homeschooling, it's because they're upset that the children are released from their control even slightly. They consider, like Matt said, to him, children are your property. Well, for Daniel, everyone else should be his property, but but like children and women in particular. So for him, it's like, well, you want them to be released from my ownership even slightly, to be taught about how terrible it is that I'm being to them, to have access to have access to people and assistance for that will help them escape my abuse.
Fighting to liberal secular
No
humanists
question,
are
he would be a
fighting
massively
to actually
abusive
destroy
parent.
that option. You go to a country like Germany, you go to a country like Sweden, bastions of secular humanism. They also have banned homeschooling. You have to put your children
By the
into
way,
these
there are good
secular
reasons
schools
for
where
that, but whatever.
atheism is the ground assumption. Not
not.
Islam, not Christianity, not Buddhism, not Hinduism. Atheism.
First of all,
So
you wouldn't
this
be happier if it was Hinduism or Buddhism or anything other than Islam.
is
Sure.
non-consensual. It is quite
just lying.
violent, because if you don't send your children to
violent,
school, the
yeah.
police will come and bust.
So this is another thing that people lie about all the time. Centrists are, like radical centrist types, are often the most susceptible to this line of thinking. That like, oh, it's violent because if you don't do it, the state will come in with jackbooted thugs and they'll do the. I've heard libertarians discuss like taxes in this way. The thing you have to remember is he's arguing against the concept of laws, because every law works that way. Oh, if you murder someone, the state will send jackbooted thugs to your door and they'll arrest you. And yeah, it's good actually. Not all violence is bad. I think violence that prevents murders is good. Again, brave soy speech. And so when you understand that, you realize what he's arguing against is in principle. He's arguing against the principle of the violence being done, of like the state will arrest you and yada yada. But he doesn't have a problem with that. This guy wants way more violence than that, and for way worse reasons. What he actually has a problem with is the specifics. He doesn't like that it's being done to ensure an education. But why are you arguing against the violence part? You're in favor of the violence part. We're just arguing about which specific thing violence should be used for. Is like a personal pet peeve of mine. I gotta find a name for it, but like when someone argues against something in principle, when they have issues only with the specifics.
Bust down your door and take your children by force, and this is what has been happening to Christians.
They'll do that if that'll happen if you beat your children too. Are you cool with that? Well, you probably want people to be allowed to beat their children, but like I don't know, if they're not feeding their children, that'll happen too. Do you like starving children? I don't know. He might. Fuck it. What is it you already don't like? If your child is being like if you're teaching your child to be an atheist, you probably want the state to come in and do that stuff. So you're cool with the thing happening. It's just about why. And so that's why, like, this is one of the, like, deceptive. I'm focusing on this because of how deceptive it is, again, of he's appealing to the audience's belief that violence is bad, because most people don't really think about, like, the fact that they are okay with violence sometimes. But using that to get them to agree with him that children shouldn't be educated.
And Muslims in Sweden. It's quite a heart-wrenching sight to see the police bust down the door of Muslims and take children in the name of...
Why is it... It's so weird. It's like, it's a bust down the door of Muslims. Okay, but like, would you be okay? Well, he wouldn't. Most people would be okay with seeing that, police come and bust down the doors of Muslims who are abusing their kids. But this isn't abuse. But excuse me, I should... Not having your kids educated is abuse. But he's pretending like it's not, because if he says outright, can you believe that the state will punish you for abusing your kids? No one would listen to him.
Of secular humanism. You are not putting your children in schools, therefore we are going to take your children away. This is the reality of secular humanism.
If you abuse your
go ahead
children,
and wipe your hands. Oh, that's not literally me. But you said you're a fan of compelled education. So you're a fan of these types of policies.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
This might be an opportunity to go into the Q&A.
Yeah,
Let's
not
do
a
it,
strong...
'cause I'm ready to go.
You can't just let him...
You got it.
You can't let him end on a diatribe. That's a problem. Like, he's always... He's never going to let you get the last word in, like Matt let Daniel get the last word in. Obviously, he's going to try to grandstand as much as possible, but you can't let him, like, make the moderator end it, even demand, like, closing speeches or whatever, because you just let him accuse you of all sorts of lies, pretend like it's a violation of parental rights to prevent abuse, and you just said, "Yep." All right.
Folks, if you want to come up
This
on
is
this
the-
right side of the room, that's where we'll
I'm
take
curious to see a
questions.
little bit
And
of what the
Chris
audience got from this,
is
so
gonna
we'll
be
listen
our
to a
MC
couple
for
of
the
questions.
Q&A, so
I've
we'll be holding the
Talked
mic.
about before why I don't think Q&A is particularly interesting, so we're not going to do too much of it. Okay, we can't hear it very much. I'm likely to hear it. Hopefully they'll repeat the question. Or maybe no one's asking yet. I can't hear it. I hear someone talking, but not what they're saying. They don't seem to be paying attention, so it's possible that no one's asking a question at the moment. Daniel's on his phone.
Okay, so one
Okay.
of the speeches was out.
Okay, I'm curious where the audience is on this.
One
We
of
should
the
get a
spe-
little bit of a gauge
The
from these
first speech was
questions.
about populism and how a lot of people believe in God, but how does people believing in it make something true?
Yeah, so do I have to repeat it or people hear it?
If you could repeat it, because I was distracted and did not hear. Thank
Yeah, so how, just because a lot of people believe something, why does that make it true?
This
So
is
I
the
agree
principal
that
question. So remember, we're asking this is Q&A for the 3 parts. So this question has to do with the first part of the debate. I know we've done it over the course of multiple days. But this was like his argument for the existence of God was basically like, well, most people believe there's a God, so, and he leaves the implication to you. And so the question, very pointedly, which I think Matt pressed him on in the debate as well, but he's a shifty bastard, was basically like, okay, how does that prove that there is a God, that a lot of people believe in it? The implication, of course, is that people can believe in a thing that's not true, and he was actually arguing against the possibility of a mechanism of discerning what's real from what's not. So he's kind of stuck there, which is why he was dodging it in that debate.
just because something is popular does not in and of itself make it true. The belief in God, or the belief that harming others for no reason is wrong, the belief in law of contradiction, those are not just common, they're common because they're biological. And
But
that
biological
tells
doesn't
us
make it
something
true either.
important
Again, he's
about the
dodging the
way the
question.
human mind works. It tells us something important about how we understand
But that doesn't
reality.
tell us that
Belief
it's true.
in God is also one of these things that is not only extremely common and widespread throughout history and even in our current times, it is something that also develops
And it's
biologically. So
It's also not true that people believe in gods. They believe in spirit beings. Those are different. We covered this already.
that tells us
I'm
something
curious if
about the
Matt will
structure
crack
of the
back
human mind and how we
explain
understand
the fallacy
reality.
that he just
So
engaged
I'm
in.
not making a simplistic argument that,
You are.
if a lot of people believe it, that means that it's true, or that's
No, I
evidence
mean you
that it's
are,
true.
right? You're pretending like there's any relevance to the biological aspect of it, but like just because someone thinks biological doesn't make it true either. If it's biologically derived, even if most people believe a thing for biological reasons, which okay, that also wouldn't make it true. Obviously, there are some things that we take as true, like the law of non-contradiction or whatever else, but the God claims can be interrogated, and you've refused to do that. And we don't, and you have to know that there are some beliefs that most people have that are false, like the belief in a flat earth intuitively is a belief that most people have.
Even though it could be evidence, but that wasn't my actual argument.
It was.
Could I, before we get to the next question, thanks so much for asking your question. Do you mind if I ask you something real quick? Like, first of all, how old are you? 12? Were you
Daniel wants to
or your
marry you.
parent bothered at all by me saying fuck so much? Okay, thanks.
Oh yeah, something else here. Like it would be like it would make sense a little bit for the question to be the catalyst for a little bit of a back and forth between the two. That's just not how modern day debate does things. It's usually if the question is to you, you answer it, and the other person is kind of expected not to. Sometimes they'll respond, sometimes not. So the fact that Matt didn't really go into it here, it's not that weird. Also, he just did 3 back-to-back debates with only a 5-minute break between the first and second part. He's probably pretty exhausted, and against this guy of all people, you know. Okay, I just want to hear one or two more questions.
Great parenting.
I was in the Navy for 8 years, and it's just a habit, but also words aren't magic. And people who spend more time focusing on whether or not I uttered a specific phoneme than the actual concept of what I'm conveying, that's all I need to know.
Next question.
Yeah, my question is to Daniel. Secular humanism promotes freedoms on, let's say, human rights, and you
I like how he's
are
phrasing it.
against
He
human rights,
promotes
right?
human rights.
No, I'm not
Okay.
against human rights. I just want a
mean, that's a lie.
balanced understanding of what is actually a human right.
Yeah,
Okay, so
so
are
he
you-
is opposed to human rights. The balanced understanding of human rights is what he means by that is your human rights can be violated if it's in service to an institution that he thinks is more important than you, which is all of them.
Against your right that's going to be protected on secular humanism, or just other people that you disagree with?
No, my rights are not protected as a Muslim under secular humanism.
They are. You
As a
just
Muslim-
want there are some rights that aren't protected in the sense that like no, you're not allowed to marry children, but that's one of those like your right to swing your fist kind of thing. Like in the same, I don't know.
My countries are
Like
being-
at that point, the right to eat pork would be violated under his view. Like that's my human right that would be violated under Islamic law or whatever. It's not a right.
bombed because they lack secular humanism. My people are being killed because
That's not true at all. Okay, so
they
go
are
back to
not
the
following
lies.
secularism. In this country, I'm being monitored. I'm put on watch lists.
Oh,
Muslims
you specifically, yes, but that's not because you're a Muslim. It's because you are a radical extremist who, in this debate, went to bat for literal, actual terrorists.
put on travel bans, Muslim views. If you express your Muslim
this-
views in universities,
this
you'll
is
be
not the
kicked out of
case
departments
for the
because
majority of
you're not
Muslims.
abiding by liberal secular
The
principles.
thing he's probably referring to about kicked out of university is probably a specific instance where the person should have been kicked out, but because they're like a Muslim radical, he's on board. He is going to act like it's just because they're Muslim. He's just
Yeah, personally, privately, you can be a Muslim and be, in a science department or a history department. But if you
Oh, so
start
they're not
talking
being
about
violated.
Islam as a value system that
Then that's
deserves to
okay
be
too.
respected and deserves to be
So you
implemented,
notice he's pretending like all he's doing is talking about Islam as being something worth protecting. No, you literally were arguing against the concepts of freedom, happiness, freedom from being groomed or whatever. Like, I don't know.
politically, then you're an Islamist and you get kicked out of.
I mean, you're
these
literally arguing in
departments.
favor of
So
pedophilia.
no, as
Yeah,
a
you're gonna be
Muslim,
on
I
some
don't
watch
feel
list,
like
buddy.
I have this religious freedom within a secular
care what you
society.
feel like you have.
Secular
You do
humanism
have freedom of
imposes
religion.
atheism on the
doesn't.
population. That's why atheism increases. It's not because of the inherent rationality
just
or
lying.
compellingness of atheism.
That's the other
it's
problem
because
is that like it's not like I don't lay this at the feet of modern day debate that much. They have this expectation of you only really answer the questions for you because they need to get through stuff in a reasonable amount of time. But it does allow him to like just grandstand because he's gonna have the majority of questions since most people are gonna see through his bullshit.
atheism has to strip people of their natural intuitions
that's-
and
yeah, okay.
brutalize them into making them into
Literal lies.
atheists. And that's what the French Revolution was about.
So notice like this guy who wants like Islamic dominion is claiming that you'll be like forcibly converted to atheism. He doesn't have a problem with forced conversion. In his world, you are Muslim or you are murdered. Maybe not murdered, maybe just enslaved or whatever. But people who are saying, hey, yeah, you can believe what you want and like you can't force other people to believe it. They're the ones indoctrinating. He has no problem with conversion. He has a problem with people not being Muslim. Again, like you have to see through the lies.
That's what the communist revolution in Russia, where they annihilated tens of thousands of churches, tens of thousands. They murdered Orthodox preachers and
By the
priests.
way, the communist
at-
revolution in Russia was not a secular humanist revolution.
The enlightened
It wasn't even really that
totalitarianism
secular.
from
Stalinism was
Napoleon,
like
and
a
how
kind
many
of
churches
of-
he abolished and
like
destroyed.
religion.
This is the history of secular humanism, and it's all on the basis of maximizing
shrines
liberty,
to Solomon and shit.
maximizing
It's
equality,
not
secularism,
irreligious.
secular humanism. This is the actual bloody, brutal history of it.
So, first of all, that's not the history of secular humanism. It is a history of some aspects of atheistic regimes. The problem with Soviet Russia and others were that essentially the state became the authoritarian church,
Exactly.
not secular humanism.
You were to, instead of worshiping whatever god you believed in, you were to worship the state. I would not call that atheist.
But a state-run body that was unquestionable the way a church would be. That's not secular humanism at all. Daniel has to invent a fiction about secular humanism trying to impose atheism. And for the record, I would object to any Muslim anywhere being on any watch list merely because they're Muslims. I would be interested in having somebody go through your browser history, considering what you've actually advocated
Hell
for.
yeah. Get
But-
him, Matt.
Yeah, see,
But-
you're joking about it,
Hell
but
yeah.
you do advocate
But-
for
Excuse me.
restrictions.
Excuse me.
People who
You
have
just
other
don't, you
religious
just don't want to hear
beliefs.
what comes after the
Excuse
but,
me.
do you? All right, never mind. Fuck it. Let's go through his browser history.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I mean, this is like you make these points, but
I make these points and
you
then you
are-
stop me from actually going to the end of it.
you are
See,
actually
as I
making the
said-
point for me. That's
As I
that's what I'm talking
said,
about.
I'm opposed to it. And while it might be interesting to find out what's in Daniel's browser history, I don't think that I have enough information to warrant actually doing that or allowing anybody else to do it. Thank you for finally letting me finish the thing that almost exonerates your ass.
What a moron.
My question for you is, in Islam's version of freedom, does that include the liberty to not believe in Islam anymore? And how much
Okay.
disagreement is there amongst scholars?
Yeah, there's no.
So this is an interesting question. It's asking about like, okay, in your version of freedom, I don't like calling it freedom, but okay, sure. Like, how much are you allowed to not be a believer in Islam? And like, you know, what do scholars say about that? There's a little bit of an implication here that like what Daniel is representing is like could accurately be described as Islamic law, maybe like radical Islamic law or whatever. But so like the question about scholars, I don't know, maybe it's not super relevant, but it is a good question. It like press him a little bit of like, am I like, let's talk a little bit about the specifics. You were talking extremely vaguely about like, oh, you have obligations broadly to some institutions. Okay, am I allowed to not believe? Am I, or will I be persecuted or murdered as an apostate?
Disagreement
Or
on
an infidel.
scholars. So I've discussed this, have many videos on apostasy punishment in Islam. And the idea is that every community and every culture has rules that punish or stigmatize defection, like leaving the group.
That's
Even
not
social
true at
media,
all.
like social media, you express certain views, you're going to be banned from the community. You can't be a part of the community because
That's
you
not the same
violated
thing at all.
community.
By the way, that's actually fundamentally different. The idea of someone leaving being punished for leaving is not the same thing as someone being kicked out.
Guidelines in order to maintain a community and a society.
Also, this fucker hates TOS from social media sites because he keeps getting banned for saying hateful shit. So like, I don't know why he's acting like that's a reasonable thing when he fucking hates it.
You have to have certain rules to prohibit certain types of speech, certain types of ideas. Every religion
So the answer
has,
is no. So he's beating around the bush, but the answer is no. You would not allowed to be to believe anything, to be anything other than a Muslim. If you were a Christian, that's not allowed. If you're an atheist, that's not allowed. If you want to leave the faith as a Muslim, that's not allowed. He would have all of this illegal and probably punishable by death.
these kinds of restrictions. Every culture has these types of
And he's trying to act like, oh, it's all the same. It's the conflation. It's the you do it too. But it's very different to say, yeah, if you spread hate speech and talk about how it's okay to marry 9-year-olds, then you can be banned from social media platforms, as it is to say, well, I mean, I sure will murder you if you're a Christian, but like that's the same. They're very different. They're not the same at all.
restrictions where they punish defection, and Islam is no differently than this. So yeah, so
You
that
didn't answer the question.
Christianity,
Please,
Judaism,
please, Matt,
Hinduism,
I need you here.
in Buddhist society, you can find stigmatization of
Stigma
defection from the religion.
not-
Because how are you going to maintain that society
And
if you
also,
allow?
also, the secular humanist would say it's a bad thing that these things are the case. Secular humanists, by the way, do not say like I don't even know what it would mean to like leave secular humanism, but like secular humanists aren't like, don't get mad at you if like, oh, I've come to Christ and I want to be a Christian now. That's not a thing. So he's lying. It's not universal.
allow people to just go and
being
mock
mad at
the
someone is not the same thing as wanting the state to crack down on them, which this guy does.
underlying belief system.
So yeah, Kemgal, like I think also is I've heard the same thing, that the official punishment for apostasy is in Islam is death. It wouldn't matter if it was or not, because Daniel definitely wants it to be death, right? Like I don't think there's any confusion about that. So whether it's accurate to the religion or not is kind of irrelevant. Daniel wants it to be punishable by death, and he's just dancing around that fact and refusing to answer because he knows that he can't. But he obviously can't just lie, because the people who believe what he believes would take issue with him if he said, like, oh no, you can be whatever, you know.
And this is exactly what we find within secular society as well. Muslims like me, I can't say certain things that I believe online.
Well, yeah, because those things are, well, I mean, you believe that it's okay to marry children, so yeah, you can't say that. Yeah, that's pretty bad, actually. But that's not the same thing. Like, I guess I'll put it this way. There is a fundamental difference between, I know I should even back it up. Speech is an action. When you speak, you are engaging in doing a thing. Some things can be harmful. Those harmful things are probably not okay. Free speech absolutists pretend they don't believe this, but they do, because they tend to also agree that harassment should be illegal. I probably shouldn't be allowed to follow someone down the street and scream slurs at them, irrespective of whether those slurs even apply to them. I probably shouldn't, like, even if they're not slurs, I probably shouldn't be able to follow someone down the street just screaming at them. It's harassment. Same thing with threats of violence. Those are also illegal, and that's reasonable. The reason why is because what you're doing is causing harm. However, it is not harmful to not believe in Islam. Now, this guy thinks it is, because, you know, it breaks from his authoritarianism. Like, you're freeing yourself somewhat from the yoke of his oppression. But there's no harm to the world that happens just by not believing. A demonstration of this is pretty clear if you just go, okay, what if someone is a Muslim, believing as thoroughly as Daniel, stops believing but keeps doing all the same things? What changed? Nothing changed, right? But for Daniel, the mere act of speaking that would be punishable by death. That would be a crime. And he's acting like making death threats online or advocating for pedophilia online is the same as merely expressing your honest beliefs that do not comport with his.
I can't say certain things that I believe publicly. Why? Because I'm seen as an extremist, or I'm inciting violence, and therefore I have to be put in jail. If I burn a certain type of flag, if I make a certain type of joke in any of these secular societies on the basis of inciting hate or it's inciting extreme.
Again, this is a very common tactic that at this point I should hope that you would be able to diagnose yourself or recognize yourself, is that he got asked a question about his beliefs, he doesn't answer it, and instead turns it into an accusation about his opponent. It's a very clever, it's just like the same strategy of like deflect and attack, not answer the question at all.
Extremism, I will be put in prison or fined heavily or potentially even worse.
And it makes you wonder, like, what is it that you want to say that'll put you in prison, my dude? Now he's acting like he's just going to say things that like aren't that weird or whatever, but they're probably things that we agree should land him in prison, like incitement to violence.
So this is found in every single legal, cultural, and moral system.
What should the penalty be for saying that the Prophet Muhammad sexually assaulted a 9-year-old?
Insulting the Prophet, ﷺ, according to Islamic law, within Islamic jurisdiction.
I kind of like this question for Matt. It's to the point. Make him answer a question. He dodged for a while. Give him it's a different question, so he can't act like he answered it, even though he didn't. But like, put it on. Yeah, let's make it explicit. What would happen if I accurately described the actions of your prophet?
And would result in death.
Death
penalty.
there it
For
is.
me as well, even though I'm not Muslim.
If you were in an
wouldn't
Islamic
allowed
society
to be a non-Muslim
with Islamic jurisdiction, according to Islamic law, if you insulted
So now
the
he's
Prophet
deferring to the authority. He's not claiming ownership. He's deferring to the authority because it makes him a little bit more palatable as a human that it's not his desire. It's like, oh, I'm just listening to the law. That's just what the law is. I'm just going with it. But I mean, obviously, he likes that.
Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you would be executed after due process in front of
Oh,
a
that makes a
judge
difference, yeah.
who would
No,
look
it
at
doesn't.
the evidence and make sure that you have actually violated the law. After full due process,
That has
if you are
nothing to do with
convicted
anything.
of that
So he's
crime of
pretending, like,
blasphemy,
again, this is
then
appeal
according
to
to
our
Islamic
values.
law, you would be put to death.
Good thing I'm not in an Islamic country.
Yeah. So, cool. Finally, Matt was able to like get something explicit from him of like, yeah, this guy's a fucking monster. All right. I've seen enough of the Q&A. It seems like this often happens when Daniel's here. Most of the questions are pointed at him because most people are opposed to him. As it turns out, most of the time a question in a Q&A section will be directed at a person that you disagree with. You're not often going to ask the guy you agree with something. You could maybe to like encourage them to flesh out an idea, but for the most part, you're not really going to. So my guess is, okay, thankfully, it seems like the audience is not on Daniel's side. But, oh boy, yeah, that one was rough. That one was real rough. I'm fine. I think Matt did a lot better here than the other ones, weirdly enough, because he finally was like, he seemed to understand where he was and who he was talking to and what he needs to do. Those aren't like great debates or anything like that. Especially this one was the worst of the three, honestly, because of what you need to do with someone like Daniel. But I think it's also the one that makes the most clear why this guy is so repugnant. And I feel like I've run out of words to describe how vile he is. He's truly inhuman. He's an awful person. And this is like part one. That's like part one of the argument of why I think it's kind of irresponsible how he gets platformed. He has established very clearly how absolutely disgusting he is, and he shouldn't he shouldn't have any platform. He does have a platform, but he probably shouldn't be allowed to dictate as much of the circumstances as he is in these debates. And he might be uniquely unplatformable, like in a debate context. He isn't here to discuss his ideas honestly. He is here exclusively to deceive people into believing in his authoritarian authoritarian beliefs. He's willing to lie openly and also lie by implication. He does not. He is uninterested in debate whatsoever. You saw that. Like, Matt would say something, and he would act as though he said actual nothing, and then lie some more. He's not interested in debate. Now, there are a lot of people like that, like the Nazis I talked about before. They're not interested in debate either, but they at least are authentic in their beliefs. This guy is measured and calculating in a way that makes him uniquely pernicious. He doesn't do this on accident. He's not a moron like the Nazis tend to be, where they're just going to scream their views and get all riled or whatever. He has specific designed tactics that are exclusively employed to deceive the audience and trick them into hopefully believing what he believes. He is often ineffective, which is nice, but that is relying a lot on the individual abilities of the audience to discern how much he's lying. And a debate isn't particularly useful as a mechanism for demonstrating that. If you were going to platform him, don't put people like Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ross, serious people who engage in serious activism against this wannabe dictator. You put people who are available to embarrass him and to show him up. You don't allow him to dictate the rules of civility. Don't let him pick the fucking topic, which he seemed to for the previous two debates, and probably picked who spoke first when it was massively inappropriate for Matt to be the one starting. It's really irresponsible how a modern day debate does this. I like that platform a lot. I like their channel a lot. This is where they're fucking up, and it's really bad. Most people don't buy in to what Daniel says, but some do. Some do. Maybe it's 1 in a million, and each video gets, I don't. This one happens to have 123,000. Oh no, that's the subscribers. How many views does this video have? This one has about 102,000 views, say on average. So like maybe 1 in 10 debates he convinces one person, assuming a 1 in a million thing. I don't know that it works out that way. I have no numbers to back this up. But what I mean is, like, even if it's that little, you're causing harm in the world to no benefit, because it's not. This isn't built to dissuade. Like, his audience isn't going to be dissuaded. Anyone who agrees with him has been tricked, and eventually it becomes authentically on board for the authoritarianism. They're not going to be swayed by argument, only by embarrassment from him. It's just about strength. And so don't put Aaron Raw and Matt Dillahunty here. Put people who know who this guy is and who are going to embarrass him. And for what it's worth, I'm not implying that I'm that guy either. I'm not good at embarrassing people in like internet blood sports. I might do a better job than Matt did just because I recognize what's going on, but I don't think I'm like the best at this. This is not my wheelhouse either. It's difficult to the point of like you should take active precautions to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen. So I don't know. We're finally done with this. We are well over when we normally go to, and I've got to take care of some stuff. So I'm going to sign off here. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day with as much freedom and happiness as you can engender in your life, irrespective of the fact that Daniel thinks happiness is bad. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.